Are you bored? Are you lonely and bored? Do you have a lot of time on your hands? Do you have hands? I'm offering you a proposal with potential financial compensation for your troubles. It may sound off-putting at first blush, but hear me out. I am looking for a human host. And I mean a willing human host who might be willing to give up some of their time to help out an odd fellow that doesn't have hands or blood. Am I asking to control your body? Yes. Sometimes. You'll still be there, but taking the back seat. Now you're probably thinking, that sounds no fun. I don't want to spend all my time riding shotgun. And that's valid. But you all spend about half of the day unconscious anyway. Your body is just there, doing nothing, a complete waste. As for me, I don't sleep, so we could have it, so that during the day, I will graciously let you do fun human things, and at night, I'll do whatever. And by whatever, I mean perfectly safe, perfectly reasonable activities. I don't drink, and I rarely go outside. I enjoy baking, I look at pictures of birds online. I've been getting into neuroscience lately. Very interesting stuff. You're all very interesting. And maybe you're still thinking, hey now, I don't want some random mind-controlling thingy hauling my body around in my sleep, Weekend at Bernie's style, to which I say, you're no fun, and you're not the kind of person I want to live with anyway. But I'm a light sleeper, you say. Don't worry. I can isolate your somatosensory cortex, so you can't feel anything. But my family will think it's weird, you say. Don't worry. You don't have to tell them. Actually, I would prefer that you don't tell anyone. Please. And should anyone question me, I'm not bad at impressions. I'll get really good at a you impression, it'll be the first thing I do. I know this all sounds very strange and potentially unpleasant, but remember the financial compensation that may or may not be happening. Hell, I'll even do some of your chores if you like, while you sleep. You can wake up and the dishes will be done, laundry folded and coffee made. Doesn't that sound nice? And then you open the fridge and oh, what's this? Someone baked banana bread last night. That was me, I baked banana bread last night. Now I should say, I don't have a lot of standards, I really don't. But I do, unfortunately, have some, so let's just get them out of the way, before I waste your time. Please do not contact me, if you have any of the following. Okay? Sorry, it's just not going to work out. I can pay for iron supplements, but I can't work miracles. A weak immune system. I don't like getting sick, I'm sorry. It's gross, sick people are gross. I mean I know it's not your fault, but healthy folks only please. A strong immune system. Yes, I know what I just said, but I also don't want to be attacked by your immune system. So maybe you're not the picture of health, but you're just kind of okay. I'm looking for someone who is just kind of okay. A penchant for alcohol, it makes me feel strange. A name that starts with a P, I'm not the greatest at speaking. It's hard, moving air through your throat and moving your tongue, and your mouth at the same time. You all do it so easy, can't say I'm not envious. I'm the worst at making the P sound. I intentionally avoid any P word in conversation, and get by well enough, but I look pretty foolish, if I'm cavorting about, pretending to be you, and I can't even say your own name. Those are my standards, but really, other than that, I'll take anyone. I don't care if you're male or female or whatever. I don't care if you're gay. I don't care if you're smart. I don't care if you don't have a lawyer. There are so many things that I don't care about. Now, I've specified all the ways in which I could compensate you, and how our relationship will be not in any way problematic, but I want to stress that, above all things, I am looking for a friend. Someone I can spend quiet evenings with. If you want to hang out with me during the day, that's great. I can give you fun hallucinations. Or you could have hallucinations the normal way, like by reading, like what you're doing now. I love to read. I love doing funny voices. I wonder what you think I sound like. I hope I sound nice. And one of the best things about me is I'm very quiet. No one else will be able to hear me except you. I'll be like your own personal friend that only you know. Like a secret friend. And you don't even have to talk to me, because I can read your thoughts. I suppose I should tell you a bit more about myself, since you're still reading. I was born in the Everglades, I think. It's been a while. But I remember being so cold, and so alone, but then I met this sweaty man in a colorful t-shirt, with a camera, and half a granola bar, and with blood so hot. So yeah, he was my first host, and I'll admit, we weren't the best of friends. It was a confusing time for both of us. I was confused. He was confused. What happened was really both of our faults, you could say. He was a bird watcher, if I recall correctly. Just watched birds all the time. I thought it might have been out of jealousy. Watching those little things flying around makes you feel kind of stuck. I felt stuck. So I decided to be a bird for a while to see if it was really all it's cracked up to be. Squished myself into the body of this lovely American crow. We settled down, built a nest, and laid several nice, healthy eggs with a man bird by the name of Richard Baxter. He was a very proud bird, very large. And he gave me so many wonderful gifts. Like children, and also small pieces of plastic. I still have all of them. The plastic, not the children. I'd never been so happy. All these hormones had me consumed in the joy of motherhood, but the crow's health was failing. I could not sustain myself. Its pathetic little heart beat weaker and weaker. I tried starving, I tried everything I could. I wanted to be a bird so bad. But it just wasn't working out. The bird stopped working. The other crows held a funeral service for me, even though I was still alive. I tried to tell them, but I'm not good at speaking, you remember. It was all just a big mess. I haven't seen Baxter since, but I still think about him a lot. Is that weird? I'm totally over it though. After that incident, I got kind of depressed, but I was too much of a coward to do much about it. I possessed a lot of trash animals, gulls, raccoons, and salespeople. I did what I could to survive. That's kind of where I am now. I am currently living in Miami, Florida, been body surfing almost every day, haha. Right now I'm using a library computer and a librarian. She does not like being possessed, boy howdy are these fingers twitching. But you can thank her for my halfway decent grammar. I'm tired of feeling like a parasite. I want to try a different approach. I want to be friends. Like with Richard Baxter, except I also live in your brain and drink your blood sometimes. But I'll make you bread in your sleep, so it's okay. It's been really hard finding someone willing to put up with me. I've tried everything. So I thought I would put up an advertisement online, why not? Can't say the P word in real life, but you can hear it in your head loud enough, I hope. I know I kept saying that I would compensate you financially, but I'm going to be real with you. I don't have much. I've got like $20, some small pieces of plastic and a book about finance. But I'm a real hoot. So please, if you are interested, leave your comments below. I would love to get to know you. I need to go now, the library is closing soon, but I'll get back as soon as I can.
Few days later.
Just borrowed someone's mobile device and also fingers, so I can now respond. My name is James now.
The scarecrow stands around 12 feet tall. A lone, misshapen sentinel in the midst of a dark field, beneath the blood of a clotted red sky. His shadow is long across the crops, comprised not of two simple poles and a sack of straw. This monstrosity is a veritable wicker man of criss-crossed slats and beams of wood. He leans to one side and wavers ever so slightly in the breeze of the dying day. Luminescent bulbs or LEDs or flashlights or somethings have been placed deep in the blackened dents of his eyes, and from each glows a pinprick of fiery orange. His wooden smile leers at me from afar, and I withdraw my hand from the rotted fence that borders his field with a shiver of discomfort. The crow to my right jumps forward along the fence and makes a peck for the shining silver ring on my hand. I shoo him away. "Leave it," I warn him, as his brothers and sisters flap and fly all around. They cover the fence and circle in wide arcs above the scarecrow's field, but none dare descend, and none hop down to its earthy ground. The twisted scarecrow, to his credit, is doing a good job of keeping the crows away. And I don't blame them. The scarecrow's field gives off a disturbingly nightmarish aura, one of a watery dream that is about to go quickly south. You don't know how exactly, but you can feel that something terrible is coming. Paradoxically, however, the feeling is an addicting one. It's fascinating and otherworldly, and it's what keeps me coming back here again and again, despite it being over an hour out of my regular route. The crow makes another jump for my ring. Scar, I've nicknamed him, on account of the grayish scratch that crosses one of his beady black eyes. "Get away," I murmur, shaking my hand at the bird. He only hops up onto a nearby post and cocks his head, looking me up and down. The scarecrow stands tall and alone, far out in the middle of the field behind him. It occurs to me that I've never taken a picture of this hideous thing. If it were suddenly taken down one day, then I'd have no proof it even ever existed. I reach into my pocket for my phone and draw it out, angling it up toward the field. "I'd rather you didn't take that picture, pray," murmurs a voice to my left. I gasp in alarm and swivel to the voice's source. There stands an elderly man, face deeply lined and shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He leans casually enough against the fence, yet gives off to me the impression of a coiled spring. One set to release at any second. Folks'll want to see it, you understand. If they know it's here. He adjusts his stance a little. They'll come in their cars and in their crowds and crush the crops. And the crops are well needed. I just stare at him in awkward silence. Why have such a spectacle of a scarecrow at all, then, if you don't want people to see it? I think, but cannot form the words. Seemingly reading my thoughts, or perhaps just anticipating the next question, the old man gestures to the scarecrow. He's a beast, for sure. But like the crops, he's well needed. Nothing less will keep away the crows. The crows love the crops, and the crops must grow, lad. As if in response, a nearby crow calls out with a quick, low shriek. The sound makes me grimace, and I look to its source, to my right. It's Scar, and he glances between me and the old man, hopping from foot to foot. Then he takes flight, soaring away toward the red sky. The old man watches him go, shaking his head. Little bastards. Where the hell did this guy even come from? There is field ahead and field behind. A long, lone dirt track passes between them. The trees and bushes are withered and scarce. There's a stile on the fence behind. Maybe the guy could have crept over it without my hearing, but even then. I swallow, nervously. Right, I settle on, simply. Sorry. The old man puts up a forgiving hand, but the sensation of the coiled spring does not dissipate. I appreciate it, he says, then tips his hat. Enjoy your walk. Don't touch the crops. And he takes his leave. The air cools as he passes me by, and I watch as walks away down the rough rural track. Step by step, his boots sending up little clouds of dust as he goes. Creepy ass old man, I mutter, once I am sure he has left earshot. I turn to look at the scarecrow, if such a behemoth can even be referred to by so humble a name, and consider taking that picture anyway. I glance back along the path, but the old man has disappeared. My fingers itch by my pocket, but I leave the phone where it is. Ugh. Frustrated by my supposed lack of courage, I chew my tongue and make to take my own leave. I reach for my bike and ease it away from the fence, and I do, so my eyes are drawn once again to the stile. A little wooden step over the opposite fence. There's a narrow footpath on the other side that carries around the edge of a low-hilled field, the one facing the scarecrow's own, and I consider my options. Though I don't consider for particularly long. There's still time before it gets totally dark. Screw it. I have time left to walk. I rest the bike back up against the fence and stride right over to the stile. The second I grab hold of the post and lift myself up to cross the fence, however, I am surrounded by the sound of crows and the wavering air of beating wings. Fuck. I shout as they shriek and caw. They dart in and out of my vision and I do my best to wave them all away. I stumble and slip from the stile and crash down into the field with a grunt, shielding my eyes as I curse the crows. Leave me alone. Jesus. Scar settles himself on the post and looks down at me silently as the others all circle and swoop and swirl. I climb back up to my feet in defiance. What the hell is this? Creepy old men, crazy crows. I shake my head and do my best to dispel the madness. This is a public footpath. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm free to walk. Why are you talking to the crows, Jordan? I sigh and brush the dirt from the sides of my jeans and head out for the remainder of my evening stroll. Starting with a quick pace and keen to leave the crows behind. Spooked out of taking a picture, I have been left frustrated, and maybe this walk will settle my urge to do something different. I can't help shooting glances over my shoulder along my journey. The enormous scarecrow disappears gradually from sight, yet keeps itself in my range of vision for far longer than I would have liked, those pinpricks of orange light in his eyes only growing stronger as the day darkens. I pass through great fields of curious crops. I take it for wheat at first, but the further I walk the darker it becomes. From pale golden color to a pallid gray, then further to a sickened deep purple, and then eventually to black. They rustle softly in the breeze. I scratch at my neck and begin to wonder if this was such a good idea. The path runs round the edges of more fields and hills ahead, around copses of trees. It isn't obvious if it would be quicker to keep going or to head back. I hesitate, but decide upon continuing. It looks like it loops around a bit farther on, likely right back to the dirt track. I pass by coils of tomato plants and resist the urge to pull one of the little fruits right from the stem. They look so good, so red and juicy. But I'm no thief, and I leave them where they are. I wonder if all these fields belong to the farmer. I wonder if he was the one who built the scarecrow. I start to actually process the implications of the things he said to me for the first time. The scarecrow keeps away the crows like the crop, and the crop must grow. The sky deepens in color as the breeze blows. What the hell kind of crop would warrant such a terrifying scarecrow? Something special, surely. I slow the speed of my walk and look to my left. The path has once again been bordered by the towering strands of black wheat. Wavering softly in the breeze, curiosity overcomes me, and I reach out a hand. I lightly brush my fingers against the stems. As I do so, the tall black wheat dissolves at once into ash. I recoil in quiet horror, watching as the ash falls to the ground in a low clump. Oh, shit, there is a fine black powder against my fingertips, and I hastily rub them against the side of my jeans as I look in confusion at the ash. Ash which, as I watch, starts to shake. Where the stem connected to the earth, an oily black vine pushes angrily out, dispersing the ash. I stare in surprise and dismay as the vine writhes and squirms from beneath the ground, like something insect-like and alive, and with a squirt it hauls from the earth a rapidly twitching slithery mass, rolling around in the ash, frothing at the edges. What looks like a feather is stuck to the obscenity's back, coated in dark mucus and quivering in the breeze. Nope. Nope, nope, nope. Hell to this. I'm not going a step further. I turn back the way I came, walking as fast as I can, jogging, really, heart-pounding as I try not to think about anything that has happened this evening. Screw it. I'm going home. The fields, it would seem, agree. It's subtle at first. I scarcely notice it. But once I do, the effect is undeniable. The fields and the ground are, impossibly, tilting upwards. Or downwards, I suppose I should say. I have to put more and more pressure on my heels until it feels as if I am running down the side of a hill, and then, a mountain. What the fuck is happening? I scream out loud, as the rush of the earth grows into the sound of a roaring river in my ears. The ground slips and melts beneath me and I fall, crashing and spinning and landing on my side, but still I fall. Ever falling as the crops rush by. The trees, now at impossible angles, are mere blurs against the red sky. Terror courses through me as I am sent reeling and sliding down the path-turned landslide, and in a minute I know that I will see him. Powerless to stop, I will see him. The scarecrow. There's a cluster of trees ahead, rushing towards me, and when they pass he will be there in the distance. Cold panic grips me tight. I want to look away, but find that I am unable. Any second now, any second. The world rushes by. And there the monstrosity is, peering at me from over the fields. The scarecrow, eyes ablaze and wooden grin stretched wide, staring right at me from over the hills. No, I murmur, then louder, no. But I cannot stop. The fences peel back and the earth carries right on through. Drawing closer and closer, the scarecrow towers up and darkens in shadow. I can hear the creaking in the wood of his arms, carried to me by the rising wind. Down, I fly. Down and down. Please. I cry out, but there is nothing I can do. I am going to be carried right into the scarecrow's grisly field. Right into his immediate domain. The dream is going south. Terror lurks ahead. I feel it. There is only panic. The dirt track becomes visible below, and still I fall. Barreling towards the scarecrow, faster and faster, the fences peel and pull away, and the crows swoop down. In a cloud of black I am once again surrounded, deafened by caws and cries. They grab at my shirt and my shoulders, dozens upon dozens of them. My vision is lost as I feel myself slowed. I stumble. There are more of them, more of the calling crows. For a second or two I feel myself lifted from the ground. I am sure of it. For the briefest of moments I am carried into the air. The sensation of falling is lost. I feel their claws scratch at my skin and tear my clothes. And with a final shriek they disperse. I am unceremoniously dumped to the ground of the dirt track, which, I might add, has returned to a welcome flatness. The wind ceases at once. I take in a great breath of ragged air and shoot a look up to the scarecrow. He does not rush towards me. He stands tall and silent and still in his field. A field blocked by that rotted old fence. I turn around, knees bleeding into the dust. There is no great mountain. No sudden steep drops, just fields. Fields and low, unobtrusive hills. Some of the crows are mid-flight, but many of them settle themselves on the fence. Rows and rows of them, silent and watching as I catch my breath. I stagger to my feet. The eyes of the scarecrow glisten bright. Scar the crow appears from a swirling circle overhead and lands on the nearest post. He hops a little and quivers his wings expectantly. We look at each other for a moment and he gives a brief caw. All right, I say, all right, with a grimace. I bring together my hands and slide off my shining silver ring. I drop it on the fencepist and the crow picks it up at once in his beak. Enjoy, I mutter as I climb up onto my bike. And with one last look behind, I head on home and pedal the hell away.
I was a fool to think that this job was just a job. Everything from the advertisement to going and actually applying was way too trivial and inviting. I'm trying to tell myself that I'm going to be okay, but I just don't know. I have some time before it happens, so I'll try to explain how fucked I am. In light of the pandemic that's been around for more than a year at this point, I was extremely tight on money. Having moved out of my parents' house right before Corona started shutting down businesses and any possible sources of income for me was bad enough, but being a college student on top of that was absolutely not helping my case. For the longest time, after leaving California, I lived in one of those $15 a night, ran-down motels while attending ASU, and life was undeniably a struggle. Cheap housing was fine, I could tolerate the dank and stained mattresses provided in the rooms. Granted, I had been smart enough to take some washable sheets and comforters, as well as Febres from home. I probably washed those daily cause of how hot it'd get in those old, barely ventilated rooms. The real problem came from the crime. In the city of Tempe, Arizona, there were almost 1,000 cases of burglary in the year 2019 alone. Now, granted at that time, the stat didn't scare me because I thought I'd be living in the dorms on campus. So, me as a high school senior thought nothing of it. But here I am. 4 nights before I ended up in my current situation, there was a case of breaking and entering reported from the floor under mine. Someone was apparently abducted and had literally everything taken. The only items that remained were their toothbrush, still neatly placed by the sink of the small bathroom attached to the main room, and the key to the room, which had the name of the person staying there scribbled onto the paper tab. Even their bed sheets were taken, strangely enough. Maybe criminals need hostages and clean bed sheets. Needless to say, that was enough motivation for me to start making some better financial decisions. I went through 4 job interviews over the course of the next 3 days. I was turned down by all 4. They said I lacked intuition. Yesterday morning, however, I came across a neatly organized advertisement online from a company by the name of MORD. The bold font stood out from my computer screen, detailing, "No experience required, great pay, call for interview." From the other advertisements I was looking at, I chose to pursue this one. I felt almost as if it was calling to me. Or maybe it was beaconing my bank account. I called there and then, and after a few rings of the dial tone, the sound of a young woman came through. "Hello there, are you calling about the job advertisements we put out recently?" she asked gingerly. "Hey, yeah, actually, I am. I would like to schedule an interview for later today." I stumbled with my words. At times I find it hard to talk to people, and the quarantine was not helping me be any less socially awkward. "Is that alright?" I asked cautiously. "Oh, eager are we now? That's no problem. Can I have your name? It's for filing purposes," she responded, clicking keys on her keyboard. She responded quickly. It somehow made my brain tick, but I ignored it as best I could. "Yeah, it'll be Jason, Brody." Fabulous. I could practically feel that woman smirking at me. The rest of the phone call was somewhat uneventful. I was told the job was hosted in a town somewhat far away from Tempe. For your own safety, I won't tell you which town. I was told I could show up to their facility around 8 p.m. This left me the rest of the day to contemplate my decision. I had somehow just then realized I didn't even ask what I would be doing at the job. I didn't ask for the girl's name either. Come to think of it, I have never heard of a company by the name of MORD, owning such a big plot of land out where they were located. What did MORD even stand for? At that point, I couldn't really care less. I had $signs waving in my face, so I hastily went for it. Too bad, so sad, I thought, as I went to prepare for later. I gathered the best clothes I could and took the evening bus to a stop relatively close to the property. Their facility was sizable, reminiscent of an office building, situated out away from everything. It was essentially a desert out here, even though the more urban areas were probably 45 minutes away. Still, there were some buildings scattered out along the road. MORD's, however, was strangely pronounced. Compared to the other dusty buildings, this one looked weirdly clean and pristine in the evening sun. As I got to the front entrance of the building, I was greeted with a reception area. The walls were painted in a bright and reflective shade of white, with black trim which met a marvelous red carpet with black and white patterns etched into it. It reminded me a casino show floor. In the mostly empty and spacious room were some white leather couches, some pillars spread equally across the expanse of the room, and some houseplants in the corners. A young, blonde girl worked the front desk. "Mr. Brody, I presume," called the girl. "Yeah, I'm here, you must be who I spoke with earlier," I responded, doing my best not to stutter. Although the girl's facial features were hidden by a blue surgical mask, she seemed pleasant. Her nameplate read Anna. Not even a last name. "Alright, if walk down that hall over there, it'll be the first room to the right." She pointed her finger to a hallway to the right of me. "Much thanks," I replied. By her voice, I assumed she was probably in her early 20s, probably working some lame job to gather money, similar to how I was. Inside of the room was a wooden desk and some chairs. The decorative pattern of the lobby also seemed to flow into office rooms as well. On the desk, laid a piece of paper and an envelope. Cautiously, I took up the paper. It read, "MORD insert address here. Room 2. Good evening, Jason. It is truly unfortunate that I couldn't see you in person before you start. As you should know by now, you will be working overnight in our facility as an overnight guard. As mentioned in the advertisement, the pay should be satisfactory. You will receive $1,500 US per working night. Your uniform can be found on the chair behind you, in the corner. You will find your post for tonight using the map of the building provided on the back of this page. Be at your post by 11:30 p.m. tonight. You may spend the time leading up to your shift in any way you'd like. Do not go down the stairs," said Aaron. I laughed at the last comment. Way to be ominous, I thought. It was about 8 p.m. then, so I decided to get some rest in before my shift. I slept in the chair, where I had originally picked up my uniform. The pay was enough to cover my tuition in a matter of weeks. No way I was turning back. My alarm rang at 11:20 p.m. I shot up, put on my uniform, and followed the detailed fire escape route map of the building to my post. Aaron had kindly used a red marker to guide me through the hallways. I arrived at my post by 11:26 p.m. Just enough time for me to take a quick glance at the rules. I figured that since I'd been hired on the spot, I was in no rush to fret over these. The paper contained a list of 14 rules. The first rules were modest. Rule 1. From a time period of 11:30 p.m. to the end of your shift at 6 a.m., you must walk the ground floor's perimeter twice. You may choose the intervals at which these patrols happen. Easy. Rule 2. From a time period of 2 a.m. to 3:33 a.m. you must take a patrol of the second floor. Walking the perimeter suffices as a patrol. Oddly specific. Rule 3. You will also be tasked with observing the CCTV cameras stationed around the building. If you observe anything you would consider abnormal, please use the phone in your room to contact the front desk. They will know what to do. Connection number 999. I sighed. It's whatever I thought. Must be some new guy hazing ritual. Reminds me of when my old burger joint used to decorate for Halloween. Oddly spooky. I laughed internally. Maybe they're just reusing some old supplies from Halloween. It's March though. I shrugged it off. Taking a look at my watch, it was now 11:30. I was officially on the clock. Looking up, I observed the room I had been stationed in. In contrast with other rooms on the first floor, the red carpet, that had been present throughout the greater part of the building, did not go past the doorframe. Rather, this room had a bleak gray carpet, a color reminiscent of wet concrete. The walls of this room were faded white. Numerous maroon stains laid in contrast from the color of the wall. Some long stains even followed onto the ceiling. Exactly across from the metal door was an industrial metal table. On the table sat 12 monitors, stacked 4x3. Next to the pile laid a beige office phone. In the corner of the room to my right were 4 blue lockers. In the other corner of the room there was a small yellow bin with something black inside of it. Classy. Flipping around, I decided to go out for my first patrol right off the bat. I took the envelope with the rules and kept reading. Rule 4. For your own safety, before exiting your room for a patrol, look through all of the camera feeds. Then refer to Rule 3. Well shit. I found it almost comical that this company was talking about my safety. After all, aren't I supposed to be the most dangerous thing in the building? I'm pretty sure I saw a baton in the bin. I didn't grab it though. I found it funny how I kept messing up. Legitimately comical. Rule 5. While on patrol, you might encounter rooms where the doors are open and people are seemingly moving inside, but the lights inside the room are turned off. Do not enter these rooms. Do not shine your flashlight in these rooms. They don't like light. I stopped dead in my tracks, almost falling over with how hard I planted my feet into the ground. I read the rule over 2 more times, thinking I has misinterpreted it, or something. I started to feel the creeping sensation of fear enter my body. Logically, this had to be a prank. Had to. I had too many thoughts to portray onto this note, but I kept reading. Rule 6. If you are on patrol, and you encounter one of these rooms, and something seems to be exiting the room, do not look at it. If you must, stare at the ground and walk backwards until you can turn around and get back to your room quickly. Refer to Rule 3 before finishing that round of patrol. Rule 7. If you are in your room and you hear scratching at your door, almost as if a pet were beckoning to be let in, do not open the door. If the scratches intensify, you must ignore them. Do not attempt to look out the small window in the door. It is best if you keep your back to the door. Rule 8. If you notice that one of the cameras in your room has gone black or has started to show static, you must take the baton that was provided to you and smash the screen of the monitor. It can get in, otherwise. Try to smash only the screen. The top of the monitor frame is labeled accordingly to where the camera was displaying. You must avoid that area whenever patrolling. Rule 9. If you sense something is following you, run into your room. Chances are it can't get past the door. Rule 10. If something manages to break into your room, remain completely and utterly still wherever you are and drop whatever you are doing. Do not open your eyes. It will try to coerce you. Rule 11. At no point before 6 a.m. should you consider leaving the premises of the building. You are locked in for your safety. I sharply inhaled upon the realization that I was locked in. This was undeniably the fastest my heart has ever beat. I was practically gauging on my own tongue. I wanted to say something to calm myself down, but couldn't find words. I managed to get a hold of myself soon after. Until the ground floor's lights shut off. I was surrounded by darkness. I stumbled backwards a few steps to find the wall of the hallway. I was utterly blinded by the darkness. I fumbled with the utility belt of my uniform, trying to find which small pocket housed a flashlight. I got a hold of it after a moment, switched it on, and all I could think to do was look around me. Wide-eyed, I turned several 360s before considering taking a step forward to trudge onward. The lights must be on a timer, I thought. Shining my light onto my black analog watch, the time read 11:40 p.m. This is absolutely terrible. As subtle as a mouse, I creeped onward. In a foot race, an ant probably could have beat me to the end of the hallway. I hadn't realized it before, but this building was quite expansive. In each hallway, there seemed to be doorways to at least 25 rooms total, and the hallways were probably each 150 feet long. The building was laid out like a grid, with hallways connecting at certain intervals every now and again, making it easy to navigate, since there were all right angles. Having not encountered anything for the first 10 minutes of creeping, I quickened my pace to a slow walk. Surprisingly, I made a complete perimeter of the ground floor in about 45 minutes, while not having seen anything. Perhaps it's because I didn't dare to make a sound, or look at anything but the hallway in front of me, but I made it back to my room safe. I peered around the room, nothing seemed to be hiding inside. Stepping in, I closed the door behind me. My watch read 12:44 a.m. Suddenly, the office phone on the table blared its ringtone. Almost stumbling over from a heart attack, I inched closer to the phone. I put my hand on the handle and held the speaker to my ear. The voice of a man came through. "Hello, how are you?" asked the man in deep and slow voice. It's good, who are you?" Ignoring my question, the man continued, "What do you believe in?" Static from the phone erupted briefly. "Wait, what do you mean?" I was sufficiently flustered, like religion. "I'm atheist." There was a brief pause. "What is your name?" asked the man. He sounded cold and lifeless now. There was no inflection left in his voice. His breaths were shallow, like his diaphragm could no longer push enough air out of his mouth. "Jason." The man's voice became distorted past what I could ever possibly try to describe. It was similar to someone choking or gargling on some thick liquid. It hurt my heart to hear somehow. But it was talking to me through the distortion. I didn't know what it was saying. The phone line cut. It was eerily silent around me now. And then it dinged on me. I whipped the envelope out and scanned the rules for anything mentioning a phone. I read. Rule 13. If the phone in your station begins to ring, you must answer it. Answer any questions it may ask. If it hangs up before you do, resume duties. If it asks for your name, do not answer. Hang up and resume duties. My heart dropped. I really had nothing running through my head right at that moment, other than dread. From the silence, came a knock at the room's door. I flipped around instantly to face it. Before taking a step forward, I looked at the paper with rules again. Rule 14. If there is knocking coming from the door to your room, it is most likely the result of not following one of the previously mentioned rules. Refer to Rule 7. If the handle to the door begins to jingle, refer to Rule 10. I looked up to the door. The handle to the door had silently been turning, and I had not noticed. I gasped and dropped the envelope somewhere on the ground from surprise. I instantly shut my eyes and crouched down, trying to find it by feeling the ground. I heard the door start to creak open, its metal hinges squeaking. Planting both hands on the carpet, I prepared for what was about to unfold. What I felt at first was a strange awe. It became seemingly colder inside of the room, but my body remained warm. Strange sensations coated my arms and legs, the kind where it tingles, and you'd expect to find a spider crawling on you, but there's nothing there. My head felt unfathomably hot compared to the other parts of my body. That's when it spoke. Its voice was reminiscent to that of the thing that spoke to me on the phone, however it was not gargling. It had the same vocal tone as the thing on the phone, but this time it spoke with inflection and an accent. It sounded human. "Hey, it's okay, open your eyes and come with me." It repeated that phrase several times, and then, almost as if it were perplexed by why I wasn't responding, it started speaking again. This time in German. "Komm schon, Freund. Es gibt nichts zu befürchten. Lass uns gehen. Bitte offen deine Augen da." And then in what I assumed to be Russian. And then in an Asian language I did not recognize. And then it went silent, but the feeling in my body was still present, along with the intense cramping of my muscles. I did not dare open my eyes. I remained in my crouched position for seemed like an eternity. When the sensations in my body subsided, I finally mustered up the courage to open my eyes. There was no monster, from anything I could see. The door remained wide open. The light that illuminated my small room of salvation spilled into the hallway outside. I shot up and closed the door as quickly and quietly as I could, somehow thinking that it might still be outside somewhere. I don't remember exactly how I felt, but deprived of oxygen from forgetting to breathe is somewhat accurate. I was sweating profusely and trying to get a hold of my breath. My watch read 1:02 a.m. Spotting the envelope on the ground, I bent over and went to review the rules. Glancing over the ones I've already read, I recalled the cameras. Looking to the table, I began to switch on the monitors one by one, with the small on-off button next to the label of where the camera was shooting. All camera feeds displayed seemingly still images of the long dark hallways. Except for one, which displayed one room in a hallway with the lights on inside. I figured this must have been the camera shooting footage of my hallway, and that illuminated room was the one I was in. The label on the monitor read Hallway 4. Correlating that to the map Aaron had given me, it seems I was mistaken. I was located in Hallway 3. Seeming as none of the rules I had read so far mentioned the lights being on, I looked down to the phone to call the front desk. Before picking up the receiver, I hesitated, almost as if the monster from earlier would start asking questions again, but I dialed 9 3 times and a dial tone began to sound. After 3 tones, the voice of a young man came through. "Hello, front desk representative speaking." He spoke with a distinct southern accent. "Hey, there's in hallway number 4, there's a room with a light on." I responded, trying to keep it together. Almost snottily, the man retorted, "Is that truly abnormal? There are consequences for calling this line without a reason." I did not enjoy his tone. "You listen to me, I have seen my fair share of fucking abnormal tonight, don't you try to tell me." He gave in after my one-sentence verbal assault. "We'll send someone over." However, I don't think that southern ass ever sent anyone. I never saw anyone walk through that hallway for the next 20 minutes. I guess I'll figure it out myself, I thought. Before I left the room, I remembered to grab the baton that sat in the bin in the corner of the room. Opening the door, I peered out, looking left and right as if I were crossing a street, and I headed over to hallway 4. Nothing seemed to be out of place, though. No doors were open, and all the lights remained off. I guess I've made it this far, might as well do my second patrol. Through the rest of my patrol, I encountered 2 of the rooms described by Rule 5. I heeded the warning of the rule, and simply walked past the room without investigating inside. Those rooms were truly strange though. Walking past the room, it sounded similar to the inside of a populated mall or train station, where there was a lot of bustling. I took a quick glance inside one of these rooms as I passed it in the hallway. Through the darkness I could see movement, but I could not relate it to anything I could comprehend. It had the form of a black mass, swirling around. Moving on, I walked down a flight of stairs, figuring I'd do an extra good job, and continue onward. Everything seemed darker down there, but it was reminiscent of a copy of the ground floor from what I could remember. My feet made a small squishing sound while walking. The floor seemed to be slightly flooded by a thin layer of water. I felt like I had bad night blindness down there. My flashlight seemed to losing power as well, or something to that extent, because the beam dimmed the further I walked. It smelled old rotting wood and rusty metal. It was also quite humid, like an indoor swimming pool. I felt some of the water from the ground soak my running shoes. My hands were starting to get clammy, and the air seemed to get heavier with each step, compressing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked at my watch. It seemed to have stopped working as well. The time remained frozen at 1:07 a.m., but I knew it was way later than that though. I stopped where I was, and leaned against one of the hallway's walls. Pulling out the envelope, I gazed upon the rules. Rule 12 was quite vague. Rule 12, you are always being deceived. Remember? This left me quite confused. I flipped over the rules paper. Written in a pronounced bold font sat Rule 15. Rule 15, do not go down the stairs. A basement floor does not exist on this building. Upon descending the stairs, your safety cannot be guaranteed. In fact, our company does not know exactly what happens upon descending these stairs. We only know the result. Thus, we do not yet understand how to effectively combat this. You have a limited amount of time to pray to your deity of choice, because you have just entered a portal to the fourth circle of hell. MORD. I felt my legs give out a little. I looked into the darkness ahead of me, behind me and all around me. I yelled from fear, and backtracked as fast I could. I jumped up 3 stairs at a time, and hauled absolute ass back to my room. I ripped the lockers in the corner of the room from the wall, and barricaded the door. I already tried redialing the phone. No one picked up. I don't know what's approaching me, but I can feel it. It's different than the creature which knocked on the door. My body is in pain, aching, and writhing, burning. I can sense it, and it can sense me. It's coming to take me. I can see it in my head, dark and disfigured, eyeless, pale, soulless and satanic. I am scared. I don't know what to do. I don't understand why I'm here. I don't understand why this is happening to me. Please, whoever may be reading my warning, if you ever agree to a job that seems too good to be true, it is.
Before we begin, I want to thank you guys for your support. Make sure to subscribe. Let's get started. My room disappeared every second Thursday of the month. For a majority of my life, it had been more of an inconvenience than a hazard, since as long as I could remember, there had been a routine. It happened to my parents first. One day they woke to discover that the door to my half-painted nursery opened to nothing but a flat brick wall. They called in a report to the police that led nowhere. They were unable to explain how or why someone could or would break in and wall off this one room of their new house. The cop thought they were wasting his time. They called a friend to come and look at it, but when he arrived the next day, my nursery was back. By the third time it happened, my mom was 4 months pregnant with me and my parents caught on that this was a pattern. They moved the crib and all the baby stuff to the guest room that day and started looking at other houses. The following month, however, the room that was my nursery didn't disappear. Instead, the guest room with the crib vanished. My parents sold the house at a loss 2 days later and moved into a new place they'd been scouting. By that next second Thursday, however, the room they decided would be mine was walled off. My parents, catching on to the pattern, took the next few months of my gestation and my infancy to learn the rules of my disappearing room. First, it was only my room that would disappear. They tried dragging my crib into their room, thinking they'd just share and never let me have my own room. They were cautious that month and camped out that first Wednesday. Sure enough, their room vanished. If we were staying temporarily over at someone's place, however, the room I was given remained intact. For a few years, their solution was to leave my toys and bed in my room, but have me sleep in the guest room every night. But I was 3 and I called that guest room my room. That next Thursday, the guest room disappeared. So, the loose rule is that anything that felt like my room would disappear. 2. It happened only for a day once a month. That day was the second Thursday of the month, but there was no consistent time. My parents stayed up watching my room with the door open those first months and made a chart. There was no consistent date. The times varied from 3 a.m., 6 a.m. on Thursday, or even 11 p.m. on that Wednesday, for when the room would wall itself up. By 10 p.m. on Thursday, 2 a.m., or 10 a.m. on Friday, my room would reappear. The room went whenever it sort of felt like Tuesday. 3. The door always closed when the room disappeared. My parents tried jamming it with doors, tops, and furniture. They took the door off its hinges. They put a metal bed frame between the 2 rooms. Either the door would slam closed, crushing whatever they used to bar the way, or a new door would show up. 4. The room was gone, not just barred. My dad tried to crawl through the windows and hammered a hole through the wall to try to get inside on those Thursdays. His attempts brought him to nothing but brick and concrete. It was like a block just switched with my living space. My parents decided to keep this anomaly secret, afraid they'd be thought of as crazy or worse, someone might believe them, and they'd take me away. So, instead, we learned to deal with it. On the second Wednesday of each month, I'd pack a change of clothes and the school work I'd need for the next day. I'd sleep in the guest room Wednesday night, go about my usual routine, and sleep either in my reappeared room or the guest room again on Friday depending on how late it appeared. It wasn't a strenuous change in routine. I never knew any different, but it worried my parents. When my mom was pregnant with my little sister, the guest room became her room, and I was made to sleep in the living room. To their surprise and my mild annoyance, my sister's nursery never disappeared. Even after she was born, her room was always intact. I was 6 at the time, so, as far as I understood it, I traded sleeping in the soft, spacious grown-up bed for sleeping on a blow-up air mattress once a month next to a crying baby. It didn't get better as we got older and learned to torture one another the way young siblings do. When I was 13 and she was 7, she had this annoying talking doll she'd play with almost every night. I hated that thing, so one Wednesday night, I tossed it in my room. She cried herself to sleep thinking she'd lost it forever, and I felt guilt that almost outweighed my annoyance. I waited by my door that Thursday, ready to make amends and bring back my sister's toy as a peace offering. My room shifted relatively early at 9 p.m. My sister's doll was there, and so was a note. It was written in orange highlighter, "Thank you." It wasn't cryptic, but nothing new had ever been in the room after it was gone for a day. Nothing was ever out of place. I screamed and ran for my parents. They read the note and turned on me. I know in hindsight they were afraid, not angry, but I only heard them yelling at me asking me what I did wrong to provoke it. None of us knew what it was, but none of us liked it. My sister took back her toy, and I slept on the air mattress at my parents' insistence, even though my bed was back. I felt like I was being punished. I thought a lot about that note. A month later, it still came to mind as I did my homework. I had an orange highlighter and a few pens and a cup on my desk. When I drew a line on my paper, I knew it was the same weathered orange the note had been. We always knew my room disappeared, but this was the first time I considered that my room actually went somewhere. The next second Thursday, I wrote a note to it and left the paper in the center of the room. Reading it now, I'm surprised at my own juvenile concerns. "You got me in trouble. Are you using my highlighter? Don't do that. I don't want you touching my stuff." That Friday, when my room reappeared, there was a paper on the floor. "Sorry," was all it said. The word itself was written with a rusty pale red. It almost looked like watercolor. Only, of course, it wasn't. It had written back its message in blood. But not in a threatening manner. The handwriting was neat, and there were no ominous stains along the edges. It was a real response from the thing inside my room. It had written its short apology on the back of my note. I hid that note from my parents. There was this giddy, childish excitement in me that felt like a pioneer of new lands. I was overjoyed more than anything to be the one to discover the secret to a room my parents knew supposedly everything about. It almost killed me to wait a whole month to write again, but when the next Mark Thursday came around, I was ready. I left another note and a cheap ballpoint pen in the center of my room. That note was gross. "Did you write it in blood? You should use pens, dummy. Here. Have this one. My mom and dad say this room is haunted. That makes you the monster, right? Do you live under my bed? Write back." From Tom. The thing on the other side already knew where I lived, but I was taught not to give out my full name to strangers. I got a response the next day on the back of my paper. "Sorry. You said not to use your pen, so I bit my finger. I'm not a monster. I live in this room. Not under the bed. There isn't a bed except on these nights. There weren't any toys for a long time either. I liked the doll. Like talking to someone. I don't have anyone to talk to here. I didn't mean to get you in trouble. Intrigue won out over caution. I think, at that age, it started as an experiment for me, to learn what I could about the inside of the room, to gain insight my parents never could. The next week I tossed my sister's talking toy and a blank notebook into the room. I left a note giving the notebook to him and telling him to write me back. I can't remember exactly what I said, but the introduction was something along the lines of, "If you have no one to talk to, then you can talk to me." I thought I was being clever, gaining its trust. I can't remember exactly what I said, but for months we exchanged messages back and forward in that notebook. It would ask me about school, my favorite shows, my favorite superheroes, things like that. I soon forgot it was an interrogation and thought of the thing on the other side of the door as an outlet for my grievances. It became my supernatural pimple. If my parents grounded me, I confided in it. If my sister annoyed me, I'd tell it how much I wished I was an only child. It wrote to me once, "If you don't like it out there, you can come play here. Stay with me for a month." Even then, I felt a serious aversion to that invitation. Yet, I also felt guilty that I couldn't trust my friend in the other room. I thought I was being too paranoid, and my letter to it that next month was an apologetic decline. I didn't want to stay with it for a month. It didn't like to talk about itself, or what it was like on the days it wasn't in my room. From what little I had gathered, I got the sense it couldn't leave. From its brief descriptions I knew the walls were bare and cold, made of coarse stone. It said there were no snacks or TV, so it was always bored, and always hungry until my room appeared. It asked me about snack foods the most. I got into the habit of saving some dinner for him, or sneaking some cookies or chips up to my room on Wednesday nights. It was a ravenous thing. I'd find entire packages of cookies and bags of chips in my wastebasket after one day. It also liked dolls. Sometimes it'd keep them for a day, sometimes for the whole month. When I gave it some of my sister's toys, they'd have their clothes switched and hair braided or done up, sometimes half ripped out, sometimes with missing limbs. The notebook always remained, but it would write plenty of questions about school, about the town I was in, and what happened on TV shows. I'd be sure to fill up that notebook with as much information as possible. Talking to it almost became an assignment, an entire afternoon I'd dedicate to my friend inside the room. Sometimes, between days of the month, I'd read through our entries and I remember feeling the nostalgia and warmth experiencing those letters. He invited me to stay with him for a day at least once a week. They were always polite invitations, a solution offered when I complained that I didn't want to go to school or go to my sister's dance recital. I always refused. "Why don't you come out of the room and spend a month with us?" I asked him once. "I can't come out," he'd written back. "I can't go anywhere until someone else comes in." Then, one day, my notebook went missing, and the first culprit I could think of was my sister. She was always going through my things and I'd seen her trying to peek on what I was writing for weeks. When I came into her room, she was playing with that stupid talking doll. When she denied stealing from me, I yelled at her, and we got into a fight. I kept asking day after day, and she kept denying it. I told her it stopped being funny days ago, and she kept insisting. "I didn't take your stupid book," she said. "Stop saying I did, or I'll mom and dad you've been breaking the rules." That got under my skin. If she took the book, fine, I'd be angry at her, but exposing my secret to our parents was unforgivable in my mind. So, I wrote up a short note for the next Thursday. "Keep as many as you want." That night, when my parents were asleep and my sister had drifted off, I quickly gathered every doll, every stuffed animal, every stupid toy my sister loved, and I threw them all into the center of my room. I made 3 trips to gather every last Barbie and Bratz doll. I went to the kitchen and gathered the box of her favorite cereal, her favorite snacks and every last bag of chips she liked. I put all of it in a pile in the center of the room, so ornately arranged, with my note in the center of the display. The prized jewel was the talking doll she kept by her bedside. By now my sister would have turned over and left the stupid thing to lay splayed out in some forgotten corner of the bed. I crept quietly to her bed and felt along the edges, and there it was, the plastic hand of the talking doll. I pulled it up, and just then, the stupid thing's voice box activated. I flinched, racing for my sister to jump awake and catch me stealing her favorite toy. She didn't. She didn't start crying because she wasn't in the bed. There's nothing in this world that's ever sobered me faster. My irritation, my vengeful intentions, and my petty sibling grudge vanished at the sight of the empty bed. I dropped the doll, my mind racing to the one possibility that seemed like a certainty. The gut twist of guilt and fear spurred on my heart and dried out my mouth. I ran to my room, sliding into the wall with a loud thud in my rush. Just as I passed my frame, I saw my sister there, holding an armful of her dolls, trying to steal back her toys. I'm told I shouted her name, but I just remember her freezing in place. The door slammed shut and it was Thursday. My parents came running and my mom started screaming. They pounded against the wall behind the door, they took a hammer to it, they clawed at the wall like animals. I stayed home from school that day. My dad rotated between scolding me and pacing along the door. My mom kept searching the house and walking up and down the neighborhood as if her daughter was only lost. It wasn't Friday until 6 a.m. on Saturday morning that week, and we were all exhausted. When the door creaked and the house shifted, we all grabbed for the door and opened it to my room. My sister's toys were dispersed all around my room, the snacks were torn into and gathered in the wastebasket or scattered along the floor. The thing we cared about, however, my little sister, was nowhere to be seen. I don't remember much of that next month aside from the hours I'd spent sitting outside that door, waiting, as if the rules would be broken, and it'd spontaneously burst open. My parents didn't ground me officially. They didn't seem to know what to do with me. My mother couldn't look at me. My father was the one to tell me it wasn't my fault every few days, and that only made me feel worse. Then, the second Thursday of the month came and I had another note. Please give Emily back. There was no reply because that night, my room didn't disappear. We all sat by an open door, waiting for it to slam closed. We waited all of Wednesday night, and my parents took off Thursday and Friday, but my room remained as it was for the first time in 13 years. It never changed back. I never found my notebook, by the way. I don't think my sister was lying. I gave her to that thing behind the wall for no reason. It's been 20 years since that night and I still feel sick thinking about it. My father tries to keep in touch, but I don't think my mother ever forgave me. The last time I saw her was at my wedding. I'll keep my family guilt to myself, but I told you all of that because now, I need help. Any information anyone can give me, because it's not over. I have a wife of my own, you see, and we're expecting. She's 3 months along, and we started clearing out the space for a nursery. Last night, it disappeared. It's amazing how vivid childhood memories can be. I'm an adult now, currently a student in college. And yet I remember these events like they had just happened yesterday. It was the beginning of second grade, and I was 7 years old. School was going by as usual. A few classes, lunch, and now recess. Recess took place on a blacktop behind the school. On the side of the blacktop, there were some small bushes and underbrush. It was a warm September day, and the summer was beginning to end. I was playing a game of kickball with a whole bunch of other kids. I was in the outfield, standing around and waiting for the opportunity to catch a ball. I found myself looking around, considering leaving the game and finding something more entertaining to do. And then I saw it. In the distance, behind one of the bushes in the woods, was a waving arm. I was intrigued, wondering if it was a classmate looking for someone to play with. I left my spot in the game, no one really batting an eye as kids were free to leave any time they wanted. I headed towards the bushes, the kid's arm still waving at me from behind the bush. Once I reached the spot, I crouched down in front of the bush and watched as the arm retreated behind it. "Hi," I greeted the stranger. "Hello," a voice replied back. Even as a kid, I could tell something was off about this voice. It was high, too high, almost cartoonish in nature. It had an unnatural squeak to it and seemed to echo slightly. I didn't question it, as my parents have told me not to judge others. "My name's Sarah, what's your name?" "Tommy," I replied. The girl then told me that she was in the middle of a game of hide and seek with her friend. She said she couldn't come out of her spot due to the risk of her friend spotting her. The two of us sat and talked for a while, Sarah never leaving her spot behind the bush. She asked me questions, such as what TV shows I liked and what games I liked to play. Time seemed to fly by as I chatted with my new friend, and I didn't even notice the recess bell ringing. Sarah pointed towards the blacktop. "I think recess is over." I turned around, expecting to see her get out of the bushes and return to class with me. However, she seemed to have vanished. I called her name, getting no response. Shrugging, I followed the rest of my classmates back into the building. The next day, during recess, I saw her arm waving again. She was in the same spot, behind the same bushes I spotted her in yesterday. She told me that yet again, she was playing hide and seek with her friend. She said she liked to take advantage of this spot since her friend could never seem to find it. The two of us talked for yet another recess session. I remember asking her why she didn't come back into the building with me after recess ended. She was quiet for a moment, but then claimed that she had brought her backpack with her to the hiding spot and had to find something in it before going in. I found that strange, as we all left our backpacks in the classroom throughout the day, but I didn't judge. Maybe she wanted to sneak a toy outside with her, or maybe she had homework she wanted to finish. Either way, I didn't question it. After talking for a while, she pointed from behind the bush. "I think one of those kids is calling for you." I told her I'd be right back as I got up to check. I asked my classmate if he wanted something, and he looked confused. He said that he wasn't calling for me at all. Before I could question Sarah, the recess bell rang, and I had no choice but to head inside. As I walked back into the building, I thought about something. Sarah's arm looked strange. Being a child, I couldn't exactly pinpoint what was off about it, but I knew it somehow looked different from yesterday. The next day passed, and as usual, I found myself spotting Sarah's waving arm during recess. I was used to meeting up with her in the familiar spot in front of the bushes. I began to find it odd that I've never actually seen her before, but it didn't really matter. At the time, I was just happy to have found a new friend. When I approached the bushes, I saw her arm up close. This time, the difference was clearly visible. Her skin was grayer, slightly veiny, and sickly looking. But I, yet again, being the polite child that I was, didn't question her about it. We talked as usual, about whatever came to our minds, until Sarah changed the topic. She asked me if I wanted to have a playdate with her this weekend. I told her that my parents probably wouldn't mind, and asked her if she wanted to do it at her house or mine. She said that we could do it at her house, and that her dad could pick me up from my house to take us there. She then asked me for my address, so that her dad could find my house. At the time, I wasn't really thinking about the dangers of giving a stranger my address, even if it was just another kid. In my mind, I was just excited about the thought of a playdate. But before I could even give it to her, I heard footsteps behind me, and a voice calling my name. "Tommy." It was my teacher, Miss McNamara. "Tommy, recess is over. It's time to head back to class." While I was talking with Sarah, I must have completely missed the recess bell. I found myself looking at the bush, expecting Sarah to come and join me. "Tommy, who are you talking to?" Miss McNamara questioned me. "I'm talking to my friend," I happily told her. "She's playing hide and seek with her friend, and she's hiding in the bushes." Miss McNamara turned towards the bush and spoke. "Come on out, recess is over." There was no response. "Hello. Recess is over, you need to come inside with the rest of the class." There was still silence. Miss McNamara walked towards the bushes and peered behind them. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream. She took my hand and started to run as fast as possible back to the rest of the class, lined up on the blacktop. They were all staring at her with wide eyes. She spoke, panic evident in her voice. "Everyone inside, right now." The class was quickly ushered back into the classroom, and Miss McNamara had called in another teacher to look after us while she left the room. Not a single student knew what was going on. Not long after, the police had arrived. Through the window, we could see the police near the bushes by the blacktop. However, the teacher quickly closed the blinds and told us to remain quiet. Miss McNamara never told us what had happened that day. For the next few weeks, recess was held indoors. Eventually, we were able to go back outside. I never saw Sarah again. It was years before I actually found out what had happened that day. I was 14 years old, a freshman in high school, when I decided to ask my parents about what had happened that day in second grade. I thought about it on and off, but only started getting curious about it as I got older. My parents exchanged nervous glances and sat me down. It turned out that Sarah didn't actually exist. I had been speaking to an adult man. In reality, he was hiding behind the bushes to conceal his appearance. He was also using a voice modulator to make himself sound like a little girl, explaining the odd pitch and echoing voice. Worst of all, the arm that I had seen waving wasn't his at all. It was the dismembered arm of a child. It turns out this man was a pedophilic serial killer who had been targeting children in local schoolyards. He would attract children, talk to them for a while to create a comfort level, and eventually invite them to his house. There, he would rape them and then murder them, dismembering the bodies. The arm he had with him had been taken from a previous victim, a little girl. When Miss McNamara peeked into the bush, she was greeted with the wide-eyed stare of an adult man holding a child's dismembered limb. By the time the police had come, the man had escaped. Thankfully though, he was caught a few weeks later, thanks to DNA evidence on the arm he had left behind. He was already in the police system due to a previous case of breaking and entering into a schoolyard. Looking back, there were so many red flags that I have missed due to being a child. The entire situation was terrifying to learn about. However, the most terrifying thing was the fact that I had almost given him my address. I didn't know Uber's carpooled. That was all I could think when the car pulled up in front of me. It was a sleek-looking ride, the type I could never and would ever be able to afford. Though what really caught my attention were the three silhouettes sitting in the back. I hadn't taken an Uber in a while, and the last one I'd taken, I had been the only passenger, so I figured that was how they rolled. Apparently not. The Uber driver stuck his head out of the window. He looked to be several years older than me, a stoic-looking guy in all black, with fair hair sticking from a cap, who at first glance looked like he had been stripped of personality. The guy slid off his Ray-Bans and regarded me with a cocked brow. I wondered if he could read minds because I was internally screaming. I wasn't used to carpooling, especially with strangers. Maybe he could see the panic in my expression, the twist in my lips that were tasting the words oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter. But I didn't say it. I was too mortified to say it. His face sort of contorted a little, like he was going to smile, but the facial pull wasn't yet in his programming. Jutting his chin at me, the Uber cleared his throat. Lily Sparks. I expected him to laugh, what with my deer caught in the headlights expression. When I could only stare back at him, his lip curled. If you're wondering why you're not getting a private ride, this is a college distract. I don't get paid enough, and grouping you kids together is a hell of a lot easier. Is that a good enough explanation, princess? I shouldn't have been surprised at his tone. After all, I knew what my generation were like, especially in California. My cheeks were smoldering. I nodded. Yes. Thank you, I said, faking enthusiasm. But the idea of jumping in a car with 3 random strangers was not appealing in the slightest. It just made me progressively sourer that I didn't have a driving license. Or a car. Those were things that cost money, and I was broke. I didn't make any move towards the car, despite confirming my name. It almost felt like my shoes were glued to the sidewalk. But I couldn't back out of the ride. I had already paid for it. Tossing the guy a nervous smile, I forced one foot in front of the other and reached out, pulling open the door, my jaw aching from grinning. Squeezing between my seatmates, I risked a glance at the strangers I was sitting with. Though it's not like I could ignore them. The guy sitting on my left, a moody-looking kid with a mop of light blonde curls falling in his eyes, his head pressed against the window, eyes closed like he was imagining himself in a music video. The boy's knee was uncomfortably sticking into my thigh. The other 2 squashed against the window were a girl with blonde curls tied in a red ribbon with her eyes glued to her phone, and another guy with dark brown hair sprouting under a gray hoodie. The 3 of them seemed to be around my age, fairly attractive. 1st or 2nd year college kids. The car ride was almost painfully awkward. The only noise was the static from the radio the driver was playing at a low volume. I could just about hear an enthusiastic presenter yelling through interference. I had no clue what he was saying though. To distract myself from my seatmates, I stared out of the window at the early evening rush hour, multicolored lights flashing by in a blur. The blonde girl's phone vibrated and she lifted it to her ear. "Hi, Mom. Yeah, I'm doing great." The brunette, who until then had found remarkable interest in the sleeves of his hoodie, suddenly turned to look at the blonde, and I caught a quizzical look in his eyes, a smile playing on his lips. I didn't blame him though. We were thinking the same thing. Judging from the blonde girl's tone, she definitely wasn't great. The way her voice broke around the word was clear evidence of that. Her expression was pure panic. The audition. Her voice rose slightly, and the blonde shuffled uncomfortably in her seat. It went good. I think I'll be getting a call back, and they said my dancing was. Her fake smile faltered, the fist that wasn't holding the phone clenching in her lap. "Yes, Mom. I understand." She nodded. "I'll do better. I promise. If college doesn't work out, I'll move back home and work at the store." Yes, I know how much you're struggling, and I want to help you. Hello." After staring at her phone screen for a second, the girl tipped her head back and blew out a breath. "Bitch." With a frustrated hiss, the girl shoved the phone in her jeans and leaned back into her seat. I could tell she was trying not to cry, and part of me wanted to comfort her, though I had no idea what to say. It's not like I could pretend to relate to what she was going through. I never wanted to make it in law. I was there for college and that was it. Though I knew of kids in my classes who were trying out for auditions or had been lucky to have callbacks. She was pretty though, with cat-like green eyes framed by blonde curls. The red of her ribbon contrasting with the white blonde of her hair made her look like a Disney princess. Looking at the girl, I knew she would make it somewhere, though she didn't even look confident in herself. After a while of watching the traffic, the sun bouncing across the horizon, I started to realize something was off. The ride was taking far too long. Even in the rush hour, it was only supposed to be a 15 to 20-minute ride back to my apartment. But that wasn't even taking the others into account. Where were they going? I had figured the four of us lived near each other, so we were grouped. Except we had been in the car for way over 20 minutes, and the driver hadn't said a word. Just as I was starting to inwardly panic, the guy who had been napping against the window finally straightened up in his seat. Excuse me, his voice was heavy with sleep, eyes half-lidded. He arched his neck, peering out of the front window. Dude, I think you're going the wrong way. I asked for the Kensington building and this is nowhere near. You're on the wrong route. The blonde caught on. She sat up, her eyes wide. Yeah. He's right, you're going the wrong way. To my surprise, the driver didn't reply. Maybe it was my imagination, but I could have sworn he stepped on the gas. Hey. Kensington was getting progressively more frustrated. Can you not hear me? You're nowhere near my building. Instead of answering the two of them, the driver reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a bound leather book with yellowing pages curled with age. He passed it to the blonde. Write your names on the next available page, please. What? The girl looked baffled. Like a review. No, I mean your names. Full names. First and second are compulsory. If you want you can add your middle. Are you serious? She laughed. If I wanted to leave you a bad review, which I'm going to do, by the way, I'd prefer the Uber app. The driver tutted. I've been driving for well over 50 years, princess. Bad reviews are the least of my problems. Now, sign your names. Nice and clearly on the dotted line, please. 50 years. The kid who had been mute the whole car ride seemed to come to life, looking up from where he had been pulling his sleeves over his hands and making little puppets with them. I was taken aback by his accent, a strong Aussie Kiwi twang. He snorted. That's bullshit. How old are you? Like 30. That's some good anti-aging cream you must have. Don't antagonize him. The girl shrieked, shoving the kid. Her gaze went to the front. I could tell she was freaking out, she was practically vibrating in her seat. So, if we sign this stupid book, you'll let us out. Nodding, the driver hummed. Something like that. The blonde sat back and opened up the book. I couldn't help risking a look. She flicked through full pages of names written in blue and black cursive. I don't understand, her voice was shaking. These go back to the early 60s. At first I thought she was seeing things or over-exaggerating, but when I squinted, I saw she was right. The blonde was tearing through the pages, right back to the start of the book. The very first pages of names in groups of 4 were practically unintelligible. But the date next to each of them was no mistake. 8/12/1962, 9/12/1962, 5/12/1962. Finally, the girl looked up from the book. Can you let me out? I need to get home. The driver shook his head. I can't do that, I'm afraid. Now, sign your names in the book. It makes things easier. What? The words were flying out of my mouth before I could bite them back. I sat up, wrapping my fingers around the strap of my backpack. The car was going faster, and I struggled to hold on for dear life. Next to me, the others were the same. I was done. Whatever game he was playing, I was over it. Doing a mental checklist, I remembered my phone was dying, and my backpack didn't exactly make much of a discernible weapon. My textbooks weren't even hardback. Can you let me out? I should be able to walk from here. I made sure my voice was sturdy. Kensington shot me a look, his lips curving, brow raising. What makes you so special? He's not letting us out, so why would he change his mind for you? I ignored him, my voice quaking. If you don't let me out right now, I'm calling the cops. I second that. Hootie reached into his bag. You've got 5 seconds. I wasn't expecting the car to fly forwards. I managed to hold on, but the others were caught off guard, the blonde slamming into the Aussie, and him hitting the window with a painful hiss. The other kid whacked his head on the front seat. Are you kidding me? Kensington yelled. Let us out. Now. It's not my fault, the driver snorted. Do you kids have a death wish? Surely your parents taught you car etiquette. Leaning over my left seatmate, I grabbed for the door with trembling hands, but it was locked. Of course it was. I pulled on it, but no such luck. I was ready to start screaming when something cool zipped across my chest, forcing me back into my seat. When the boys hissed out too, the girl letting out a shriek, I realized the same thing was happening to them. Our seat belts. I hadn't even thought of putting mine on in the first place, but this one was different. It wasn't the kind that I was used to, comfortable and loose across my chest. I had sweet memories of riding in the back of my dad's truck as a kid, knowing that the ratty belt holding me to my seat would stop me from flying through the windshield. This one was practically slicing into my shirt, pinning me to my seat. When I struggled, I felt the edge of the belt cutting further into my chest, practically suffocating me. The more I tried to lean forwards, it's like the damn thing had a mind of its own, growing tighter and tighter over my chest. The others were locked into a state of shock for a moment, and I caught their expressions in the flash of headlights. Fear. The blonde girl was crying, tears trickling down her cheeks. The kid with the hoodie let out a sharp exhale. When I turned to him, his bag had fallen off his lap when the car had lurched forwards. His arms were pinned behind the belt. Oh fuck. His voice was hysterical cry, and I had to swallow barf shooting up my throat. We're going to die, aren't we? I've seen a Netflix drama about this type of thing. Uber drivers who murder customers who give them bad reviews. His words might as well have been a knife sticking into my spine. I tried to reach for my bag, but the belt held me back, restricting me tighter and tighter. Please. I hated how pathetic my voice was. We don't want any trouble. Are you seriously begging him? Kensington snapped at me. When I turned to him, he was squirming in his seat, trying to reach his jeans, but he was stuck. You're dead, he gasped out. When I call the cops, you, my friend, are going to jail for a long fucking time. He jerked his head at me, the blonde girl, and the Aussie. I don't know what the hell you want, but we're not going to give it. I mean, are you kidding me? We're broke-ass college students. Why not kidnap an A-lister? They'll have clothes worth thousands. My jacket is from the thrift store and I have, like, maybe $10 in my bag and change. The blonde nodded, struggling wildly. I don't have any cash on me, I swear. The driver finally turned to us, a smug smile plastered across his lips. There was a gleam in his eye that turned my gut. This car is one of a kind, I'd like you kids to know that. It can't be detected, and it blocks out radio, phone and Wi-Fi signals at the touch of a button. It's also soundproof, so don't bother screaming. I have a headache. Also, I wouldn't struggle if I were you. The more you fight the belts, they will get tighter. And trust me, you don't want that. I once had a group that struggled so much they managed to skewer themselves and made a mess. I had to get a new car since the blood wouldn't come out of the seats. His fingers tapped a bead on the wheel. I saw potential in them too, which was sad. I'm never wrong about the kids I take. The kids you take. Hootie parroted. Wait, what do you do to them? The driver shrugged. Well, you already know what happens to the ones who struggle. As for the ones that actually do as they're told and sign their names in the book, I'd like to say good things. So if I were you, I'd do as you're told. Good things. Kensington was stiff in his seat. What is good about being kidnapped? You'd be surprised, young man. Now, be quiet. I have a headache. Don't fight your belts, and you'll be fine. That was when we stopped struggling. The guy could have been lying, sure. but I could already feel my belt cutting into my skin. I went still. Stiff. The driver turned back to the wheel and cranked the radio up. "Don't worry," he sent us a half a smile when the blonde girl let out a spluttered sob. "If I'm correct, and I usually am, you four have got nothing to worry about." None of us answered him. "I don't," we dared. There was a song on the radio, some pop song I recognized. I don't know why, but I latched onto the lyrics. Lost youth. It was what I suddenly wanted. I wanted to fall in love and experience heartbreak. I wanted to sing at the top of my lungs, dance like nobody was watching. Everything I had ever taken advantage of, I prayed to be able to do it again. Everything I had complained about meant nothing. I didn't realize I was crying until Kensington nudged me. Looking up at him, I wondered what his story was. Prominent eye bags shadowing olive skin, what looked like a reassuring smile trying to crack from his lips. "It's okay," he murmured, leaning into me. Though he wasn't just talking to me. His eyes were on the others, his expression determined. "As soon as we get to wherever this asshole is taking us, we're taking him down. 4 against 1. The boy's voice was panicked, his breaths coming out in sharp pants. "Unless you three want to get hacked apart." "Shut up," the blonde whimpered. "Just shut up, you're not helping." "I'm saying the truth," Kensington hissed back. "Are you in or not?" "It's not worth it." Hootie breathed. "Didn't you hear the guy? If we don't struggle, we'll be okay." Kensington actually laughed, though it was more of a sob. "And you believe him?" He let out an exasperated hiss, trying to throw himself forwards. The belt snapped him back, and he yelped. I didn't think Aussies were that gullible. Hootie's head whipped around, his expression darkening. Under the dim glow of the car lights, I noticed his eyes were sparkling with tears. "I'm Kiwi, dickhead." He spat, ducking his head, his voice choked up. "I shouldn't even be here." Kensington paused. "Before, there's no difference between an Aussie and a Kiwi." Hootie scowled. "Try and tell that to a Kiwi. They'll smack you in the face." "Stop," the blonde whisper shrieked. "What use is arguing? We should be working together." Kensington raised a brow. "That's what I suggested, and Bird Boy over there ripped my head off." The girl ignored him. "We should sign the book. That's what he wants." Before any of us could reply, she writhed under her belt, wincing. I bit back a cry when I saw the belt tightening around her, the edge cutting into her breast. "Hey, asshole. You said if we sign the book, you'll let us go, right?" The driver shook his head. He was laughing, his body shuddering under the dim light of the headlights. "I never said anything about letting you go. If you sign your names, I said things will go a lot easier. It's mainly so we can process you for easier." Something cold slithered down my spine, and the girl sat back in her seat with a whimper. I expected her to ask what he meant, but I don't think she wanted to know. None of us did. I figured the others would try something else, maybe banging their fists on the windows. The boys lapsed into silence, and my eyes grew heavy. But I couldn't fall asleep. It felt like hours had gone by when the car slowed down, and that set the four of us into a frenzy. The Kiwi tried to lunge forwards, but that only resulted in his belt tightening. I tried to see where we were, but every time I moved, there was pain. It was pain like I'd never felt before, cruel and unrelenting, slicing into my flesh. The only one of us who was able to see out of the window was Kensington, who had been smart enough not to fight the belts. He pressed his face against the glass. I tried to follow his gaze, but I couldn't fully see where he was looking without forcing myself forwards. His voice was heavy with sleep, and I wondered if he'd nodded off at some point when the rest of us had sunk into uncomfortable silence. "Where the hell are we?" The driver parked the car easily before switching off the radio. He twisted around to smile at us. "Well, for some it's their final destination. But for others, for the shining stars that you guys know and love today, it's a place of rebirth." I didn't have time to question that. Before I could even begin to think about protesting or attempting to make a run for it, my belt zipped back into place and I could breathe again. There were nastier red marks where it had cut into my shoulder and chest, welts decorating my skin. I couldn't be relieved though. The four of us were herded out of the car. For a hopeful second, I thought, oh God, I really thought we could overpower him, just like Kensington said. He jumped out first, and then I did, followed by Hootie and the blonde girl. But when the driver pulled out a 9mm Glock and pointed it between my eyes, swinging it between each of us teasingly, baiting us to challenge him, I lost all faith that I was going to see my mom again, or do any of those things I'd taken advantage of in my life. I didn't run. Just looking at the others' expressions, they didn't dare either. We just sort of stood there, shivering, wondering when he was going to strike. I pictured it far too morbidly in my head. Bang. The gun would go off, and Kensington would drop to the ground, a bullet wound in his head. Then Hootie and the blonde girl. They would hit the ground, and I'd have that split second to run. To either stand there, frozen solid, or take a chance. Run. I wondered what it was like to be shot in the head. Would I feel pain? Would it be like going to sleep? The temperature had dropped, a cutting chill blowing my hair from my face. The driver tied our hands behind our back with scratchy rope. Standing in the bitter cold, I finally glimpsed what our so-called final destination was. It was a house. Just a normal house, the type my parents had back home. Risking a look at the others, we seemed to share a collective feeling of panic. It looked out of place in the middle of nowhere, windows lit up with warm golden light. The door was bright red. There were cars parked outside, and bizarrely, what looked like a hot tub on a wooden platform, sun loungers dotted around it. Oh, I get it. Kensington stumbled forwards when the driver stuck his gun in the back of his neck. You're planning on making us servants, right? For your fancy-ass country house. He let out a scoff. You do realize you can just ask people, right? There's no need to, ow. He hissed out when the driver prodded the gun into his spine. Stop talking and walk. His voice was calm. First of all, before we go in, I want to know your names. You will be asked for them again, but I want to know them for my book. Kensington scoffed. Sure. That makes sense. He staggered further, tripping over his own feet. I remember taking mental pictures of the sky, the moon poking through clouds dipped in light. My name is Roman. Quinn, the girl whimpered. My name is Quinn. Next to me, Hootie was struggling in his bindings, his gaze glued to the mildew we were treading through. Luca. My own name was choked in my throat. Lily. The driver laughed. Come on, kids. I said full names. I've never heard a less enthusiastic group. Roman laughed. He actually laughed, and I indulged in it. A real laugh. Which I didn't think I'd hear again. I was hyper-fixated on his wriggling fingers darting in and out of holes in his restraints. Roman Denver, he spat. Happy. Again, my own name was leaking through my lips. It felt wrong. I wanted to use a fake one, but would it even matter? Would it make my death any less inevitable? Lily Sparks. The others followed suit. Quinn Bracken and Luca Islington. The four of us were led inside, a hallway lit with candles. That's when I started stumbling, struggling to walk. Quinn came to an abrupt stop when a door was pulled open at the end by two guards, and the driver stuck his gun into the back of her neck. Was I not clear, Quinn? He murmured. Behave, and like I said, this will end well for you. The girl didn't move. She just sobbed. The driver grabbed her shoulder and shoved her forwards. When we were unceremoniously shoved into the room as a four, I was greeted to darkness once again, lit up by a chandelier of candles hanging above. Roman was standing by my side. He glanced up, his expression crumpled with confusion. These guys really like their candles. His voice was quaking, but I was grateful for it. If it weren't for him, I'd be like Quinn, struggling in the driver's grasp. In front of us was a desk made of rich mahogany. There were 4 people, 2 women and 2 men, sitting behind it. Each of them had a single piece of paper in front of them and a glass of water each. When one of the women spoke, her voice was like wind chimes. Hypnotizing. She, like the others, was in casual wear. She wore a red blouse and pencil skirt. She was beautiful. Truly beautiful. Her skin was white like snow, lips blooming blood red. "Line up, please," she said, leaning forward. "I want to get a good look at them." I don't know what came over me, but I found myself stumbling into formation with the others. Their eyes went straight to Luca. "Remove the hood, or we won't even consider him." The driver nodded and ragged the boy's hood down, revealing the mop of curls he looked self-conscious of. One of the men sitting at the desk hummed, "We'll start with the blonde." He inclined his head, his gaze stapled to Quinn. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Quinn was shaking. "Quinn Bracken." She whimpered. "Please. I don't know what's going on. I just want to go home, pretty." The man murmured. "No. Gorgeous." He jutted his chin at the driver. "Turn her around. I'd like a good look at her." The driver did as he was instructed, gently turning Quinn around, while the strangers marveled her. The woman was smiling. "She is beautiful," she said. "What are we thinking? TV star. Should we start her off as an influencer?" "What?" Quinn squeaked. The man's smile disappeared. "Jones." He nodded at the driver, while the woman took a dainty sip out of the glass in front of her. "I thought you said they would be compliant." "I wasn't expecting them to talk back. They are to be docile and submissive." The driver, or Jones, chuckled. "Trust me, they're worth it. And don't worry. If they open their mouths again, I'll take action." "I should hope so," the woman said. Her eyes flicked to Roman. "Show me the boy." I could only watch, baffled, as Roman was paraded in front of the 4 judges. "On your knees, boy," the woman said. And when Roman lowered himself to his knees, squeezing his eyes shut when Jones ran his fingers through the boy's hair, pulling at his cheeks and lips, like he was a doll. "Very handsome, indeed. I like him." The same was done with Luca. Though the judges saw him more of a puppy. They cooed at his so-called adorable dimples, praising his symmetrical facial structure and strong jawline. Though they all agreed his hair was definitely a flaw. "We can get rid of it," the woman said with a smile. "It's no problem." Her eyes glittered. "I'm thinking a children's network for him. Disney or Nickelodeon. Then when he's made a name for himself, we get him into more adult teen dramas. I can see him becoming a teen girl's crush." The other man, who had not yet spoke, straightened up. "As for the other one, I think we're looking at the next Noah Centineo." His eyes flashed to me. I could feel his gaze taking all of me in, hyper-fixated on my flaws, on the pimples I'd tried hard to hide with foundation, my funny-shaped nose, and wonky teeth. I could tell he wasn't impressed. "Turn around," he ordered. I did. I turned around for him, my head spinning. When he scoffed, the others murmuring amongst themselves, I wanted to scream. "She is pretty." The woman spoke up. "Not gorgeous, like the blonde. But she does have a youthful look to her." "Yes, I can see it," the man said, like the other kid. "We start her off on a children's network. I can see her on Disney." I merely laughed. I held it in, but it was so hard not to laugh. So surreal. So completely fucking surreal. Me on Disney. When I was told to turn back around, I could barely stand up properly. Jones had to keep straightening me up. The door opened, and a girl who was younger, around 18 or maybe 17, hurried in. She was dressed in a white dress, her feet bare against the cool wooden floor. Her eyes were half-lidded, lips slightly parted, as if she were about to say something, but couldn't. Jones retrieved what looked like an old-fashioned chalice and situated himself in front of her. A final test. The woman with a voice like wind chimes spoke again. "We will taste each of you. If you are not of pure heart, then you will join us and we will make you a star." Her lips twitched. If you are of pure heart, you will offer yourself to us. What? Roman finally spluttered out. Are you fucking kidding me? What are you, huh? Some kind of cult? Before he could continue, Jones lunged at the boy, grasping him by his hair and shoving him back to his knees. I was pushed to the ground too, followed by the other two. One of the men left the table and made his way over. He held a knife and cut into our hands, one by one. I barely felt the sting of the blade slicing through my flesh. I thought he was going to force us to squeeze it into the chalice, but he lapped it from our hands, and I suppressed the urge to turn and try and run. Try and get out. But there were guards in front of the door. There was no way out. The man tasted Roman first. His facial expression crumpled, and he spat it out with a spluttered laugh. Young man, what did you do? Roman didn't move. I didn't do anything. The man's eyes were shining. Really? Because you taste revolting. You are far from pure-hearted, my boy. Roman ducked his head. The woman, still sitting at the table, laughed lightly. There is no judgment here. At least of your past endeavors. When you join us, you will forget your old life. Every bad thing you ever did will be cleansed from your mind. I wasn't expecting the boy to answer, but he lifted his head, his eyes glistening. I burned down my elementary school, he whispered. I burned down my elementary school and blamed it on my teacher. The man dropped his bloody hand like it was contagious. And what are you forgetting to tell us? Roman shook his head. No. Young man, the woman from the front purred. It's better to get it out. You're the type we want. The boy was trembling. A kid died, he whispered. A kid died, and I left him in there. I left him in there to burn. Taking a step back, the man's smile broadened. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? Roman didn't speak. He was a sobbing mess, and I couldn't look at him. Luca was next. Again, his blood was spat out. The man's laugh chilled me to the bone. Again. He gripped the boy's chin, the claws of his nails, forcing Luca to face him. Murder. He murmured. Son, I really didn't think you were capable of that. No. The boy shook his head, struggling in the man's grip. No. It was night. I was driving, and he came out nowhere. The man cocked his head. But, let me guess. You left the poor kid to die. Am I right? Luca didn't speak. But not just that. He cackled. Did you take anything from him? A wallet, perhaps. Again, the boy didn't answer. But the man looked gleeful. When he moved to Quinn, and sure enough, her blood making his eyes pop out of his head, she sang like a canary before he could question her. I stole all of my parents' savings for my tuition. The man held her gaze. That's not all though, is it? Quinn dropped her head. I stole the money that was supposed to go to my dad's medical bills. And he died. He died, and I still took it for my tuition. Quinn was sobbing, but the man was laughing, reveling in her pain. I was next. My hand was sliced open, and he tasted me, his tongue grazing across the cut on my palm. I waited for him to laugh, or spit my blood back in my face. Instead, he hummed, before lapping at it again. I resisted against yanking my hand back. Interesting, he murmured. You are of pure heart, young lady. I didn't know what that meant. But it didn't take me long to find out. Everything seemed to go by, like the world had been catapulted into fast forward. The girl in the white dress was forced in front of them, her throat slit, the chalice filled with glistening ruby. Drink. The other three were ordered. Her blood is mixed with a special ingredient. Believe me, it is wonderful. You won't be able to get enough of it. No, Roman said, Luca echoing his words. You're crazy. But the woman just giggled. Young man, do you really think you have a choice? Either drink and join us, or offer yourself to us, like dear Lucy here. She nodded to the dead girl in the white dress. Do you want to forget your past? They did. I don't know why they did. Maybe they really thought they would be cleansed of the things they did. I could only watch as they drank, one by one, at first sipping uncertainly, and then gulping down, spluttering and giggling drunkenly. I watched who they were, those personalities I had known, Roman, Luca, and Quinn, evaporate from their eyes. Any rebellion they had was gone, and they surrendered to it. Whatever it was. The last time I saw them, they were on their knees, slurping blood from the floor, laughing in glee with monster snarls, their eyes devoid of anything human. Not anymore. The woman was smiling at me. Her eyes were wide with greed, and I was paralyzed, watching the ones I had thought were the hunted like me become the hunters. Take the pure heart downstairs and harvest her for the next 4. Her words sent needles sticking into my heart, but I couldn't move. I couldn't stop looking at the others. They were like animals. Our kidnappers indulged in their greed, gathering more blood into the chalice and letting them drink from it. The more they drank, the less human they became, adopting animalistic grins that I could no longer recognize. Jones nodded and grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back. Of course, Eloise. I was taken out of the room and back down the hallway. But instead of taking me downstairs, Jones kept going. The doors were opening, and I could feel the wind on my face. I could see the moon again. I was sobbing. I was screaming. My binds were cut. But I couldn't move. Go. Jones' breath was in my face. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me. Do you hear me, kid? Go. I didn't question him. I ran. I fucking ran, until I found the car. Until I found my phone. The others' phones were gone, and I realized it was never meant to be me. It was always going to be them, and for reasons I will never know, Jones chose to have mercy. It's been 3 years since I was taken. I sometimes watch Roman on Netflix and Disney along with Luca. They of course debuted with different names. You know them as big names, and I know them as some unlucky college kids. Our kidnappers were right. All 3 of them made it. Quinn is exactly who they wanted her to be. She's one of the biggest influencers on the planet and has been in countless movies since. Her name is plastered over award shows, and she's currently bringing out a perfume for her millions of fans. I'm happy for them. I don't know why I'm happy for them, because at the back of the mind I know they are no longer human. I know that Lucy's blood did something to them. They have barely aged, and something about that fucking terrifies me. It's made me realize law is filled with Romans and Quinns and Lucas. I want you to know their real names. Even when you see another one. I want you to know that behind the star that you see is a person who was forced to become a Hollywood puppet. I don't know why Jones spared me, but I'm so grateful he did. I've made sure to do everything I took advantage of before. I'm writing this to spread awareness. Jones saved me, but he might see you as perfect for them. Please be careful. That is, unless you want to be a star. I've always wanted to see them again. Face them. I want to know if they're still in there somewhere. Maybe one day I'll look for them. Growing up, my best friend was Matthew Ramsey. He was a year older than me but still in my grade. Not because he was stupid. But his father had died when he was in the 4th grade, and for a few months Matt was having a lot of problems at home and at school. When he got held back and put in my class, we became fast friends, and it wasn't long before I was spending more time at his house than my own. Matt's mom was always nice, but she was also working most of the time. So, that meant we wound up hanging out with Matt's Uncle Gene more than anyone else. He left us to our own devices most of the time. But if we were having a sleepover and Matt's mom had a late shift, Gene would come over and keep an eye on us until she got home. Those nights are some of my favorite memories of childhood. Hanging out with my best friend while his cool uncle cooked us hamburgers and told us stories he'd lived or heard during 20 years of traveling the world in the army. He was retired on disability when I knew him. And just looking at the pot-bellied, Gray-haired man swigging a beer while absently poking at the grill. I had a hard time believing he'd ever been a soldier, much less the globe-trotting adventurer he told about in his stories. But when he settled down and started talking, everything seemed to magically change. Unlike a lot of adults, he seemed to understand and appreciate what we wanted to hear and were interested in. Tales of battle and exotic lands, guns and tanks, interesting people and dangerous creatures. As we spent time with him, I felt sure that he'd run out of stories, but he never did. In fact, in the last years I knew him, he started telling us about some of the stranger things he'd ever seen or heard of. If it was someone else, I'd have immediately written these stories off as fantasy, increasingly elaborate and sensational stories to entertain his maturing and potentially jaded audience of two. But Gene wasn't really that kind of guy. He was a good storyteller, but he was honest, and I never got the sense that he was embellishing anything beyond putting a slight polish on a potentially dull tale. And while I can't say for sure that much of what he told us wasn't bullshit, what seems clear to me now is that one of his stories probably saved my life. This was when I was about 12 and Matt had just turned 13. We were going to camp out in the woods right behind Matt's house, and Gene had come over to hang out until we went to bed. He'd made a small fire in the pit in the backyard, and after dinner we all sat around it, staring into the fire, while he told us about the time he'd spent stationed up in Alaska. He said for the most part it was just cold and boring. The towns up there were small and the people, while pleasant enough, tended to keep to themselves. And the land was beautiful, but in an alien, almost hostile way that made him pine for the warm, dry hills of Arizona, where he'd been stationed for years before this latest assignment. His job there wasn't even interesting. Just handling requisitions and hanging out with his boss, who spent most of his time drunk or asleep. Still, he told us, when his boss was awake and not too far gone, he was a pretty cool guy. He'd tell Gene stories about the people up there, local histories, myths and legends. And it was from him that Gene had heard about the woman that would sometimes come to your door, asking to be let inside because it was so very cold. The way my boss told it, he was working at a weather outpost north of Anchorage when a big snowstorm came in. He had supplies for a few days, but by the third night he was starting to get nervous. He'd lived up north for a few months by that point, but this was the first time he'd felt really trapped by the weather. Between the increasing snow and the isolation, he admitted to letting out a scream when he heard a knock at the door. My boss wasn't no rocket scientist, but he wasn't a fool neither. He knew no one was around for 20 miles or more, and the odds of someone being out in that kind of weather at night, it just made no sense. His first thought was that it was someone come to relieve him for some reason, but as he approached the door, he heard what sounded like a young woman's voice on the other side.
"Please let me in. I'm so cold."
This threw him off. There were no young female enlisted locally that he knew of, and the more he thought, he realized he would have gotten a message beforehand if someone was coming up tonight. So who could this be? Heart pounding, he answered. "Ma'am, who are you?"
"I'm cold and lost. I got lost in the storm. Please let me in."
It was so strange, but she sounded scared, and if he left her out there for much longer, she was apt to freeze to death. Still, 2 feet of snow had fallen since he'd cleared the front door earlier in the day. If he was going to get her in, he needed to go out there with a light and shovel and clear the way. "Okay. Give me just a sec and I'll be out there." He put on his outerwear and headed up the ladder to the roof hatch that was mainly used for accessing the equipment up top, and when the snow got too high to use the main door. He told me it really was bitterly cold. The coldest he could ever remember it being, though some of that was because he was so scared. He told me that part of that was him being scared for the girl. But only part. He said another part of him could sense something wasn't right. That there was something strange and dangerous beyond just the oddity of a stranger out in the midnight cold. Said that was why he shined the light over the edge of the roof before he went down to clear the door. Gene gave me and Matt a nervous smile at this point, taking another sip of his beer before setting it aside. He said most of it was buried in the snow outside the door, but looking down, he could still make out the top of something's body. Said it was huge, probably 500 pounds or more, with a segmented ivory shell like a lobster and furry white spider legs that sat tensed and ready. The highest arches like small drifts just breaking the snow surface. The worst part though was its head. Because it wasn't a head at all, really. Over 5 feet tall and upright, the head had a slim and delicate shape covered in what looked like a dark poncho or cloak. Gene glanced between us as he rubbed the side of his face. He said he could see a face in that cloak. A woman's face. The most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Shifting in his chair, he went on. But it saw him too. This look he got, it was all in a couple of seconds, and by then the thing had noticed the light shining down and turned that head that looked like a woman up toward him. He told me he'd been terrified by that point, frozen to the spot, and some part of his brain that was still working thought she would say something else to him. Try to get him to come down. Gene puffed out a breath. But instead it started to scream. He said the noise didn't come from the woman's mouth, but instead he saw puffs of snow along its body like steam escaping a pot, and the air was filled with this terrible screech. He knew it was angry, and it was coming to get him. He got going then. Made it to the hatch, locked it behind him, and got his gun ready in case the thing made it inside. Said he heard movement on the roof, but nothing ever tried to get through the door or the hatch. He stayed awake until sunrise, and then he radioed for help, using the excuse that he'd gotten bad sick. Matt and I watched him wide-eyed and terrified as he gave a small laugh and shrug. And that was it, at least for the most part. They came and got him. There was no sign of anything wrong outside, and he never told anyone above him about it. Gene leaned forward toward the fire. Until one night he was in town drinking, and he buddied up to one of the locals. They were swapping bullshit for a while. And eventually he got comfortable enough that he told the guy about what had happened up at the weather station. Told me his drinking buddy got real sober real quick. Told him he was real lucky to be sitting there able to talk about it at all. I waved my hand at Gene like I was in class. So this dude knew what it was. Gene gave an uncertain nod. Maybe. At least a little. Guy told him there wasn't some fancy name for it, but it was just something strange and deadly that lived up there. Maybe other places too. He'd heard a few stories over the years, and he had some grandpa or whatever that claimed to have seen one. Some people said it was an evil spirit. Others some kind of animal we don't know about or understand. But whatever it was smart. Smart as a person and able to talk to you. To trick you. My boss just called it the liar, and he said he'd gotten that from his buddy. I figured it was because it had that lure, that part of itself that it could make look and sound like a person. But he said no. It was because, according to what he'd been told, the thing had certain rules it followed. It only preyed on things that invited it, that had been fooled by it to one extent or another. And whatever it said, it was always a lie. Always. He pointed his finger at me and then at Matt. Now that might sound obvious, but it's actually a pretty useful thing to remember. Because the way I understand it, it can't tell the truth. And it's compelled to talk, to lure, to try and trick you into letting it in, so it can get you. So if you ask it questions the right way, things it can't not answer and things that give away its lie, you can figure out what it is without ever opening your door. Gene sat back and gave a grin. I just hope nothing comes scratching at Yal's tent tonight. I hadn't thought about Gene in some time until 3 nights ago. Matt was diagnosed with leukemia at 14 and was gone 2 years later. And in the 20 years since I haven't seen or spoken to his family over a couple of times on the internet. And yet 3 nights ago, as I sat cold and panicked on the side of a dark road, Matt's uncle in that story came flooding back to me. I'd been driving in the worst snow I'd ever seen, much less tried traveling through, when I felt my car starting to slip on the road for what felt like the 100th time. The snowstorm was unusual for where I live, and I didn't have snow tires or chains, but I was driving as slow and cautious as I thought the situation allowed. My wife was having contractions 3 hours away, and while I knew she'd already been checked in at the hospital, I wanted to be there as soon as I could get there safely. But I was an idiot. When the car hit a patch of ice, I overcorrected and slid off into a ditch. I was on a highway, but it was the middle of the night in a snowstorm, and I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. I tried to get the car back out on my own, but all that got me was wet and cold. Cursing, I called for a wrecker, finally getting one the third number I tried. They were coming, but it would be about 4 hours based on the weather, my location, and the calls ahead of me. Looking at the gas gauge, I decided to run the car for just 10 more minutes to build up some warm air, and then sit in the dark for a while to conserve fuel. Shivering, I tried to call the hospital to check on my wife and get her a message as to what had happened, but I couldn't get the call to go through. I had plenty of charge left, but where I'd had 3 bars just a few moments before, now I was down to 1 bar that flickered like a dying candle flame. As I watched, it went out a last time and then didn't return. Maybe if I turned it off and turned it back.
Please let me in. I'm so cold. Please let me in. I'm so cold.
I let out a scream and looked over at the driver's side window. Staring in was a small boy, his dark eyes wide with pleading terror as they met mine. Please, mister. Please let me in. I could see what looked like snot frozen on his upper lip, and his pale blue lips were trembling as he begged me for help. My God, how had he gotten out here? I needed to get him inside, turn on the car again, and then I suddenly had a distant memory spark in the recesses of my mind. The orange glow of a fire pit lighting Gene's face as he told us about something that hunted out in the cold and the dark. The liar. I looked back at the kid. This was ridiculous. That story wasn't possible, and this child was going to freeze to death if I didn't hurry up and do something. Yeah, he looked like he had a hooded jacket of some kind, but it was well below freezing out there, and if swallowing, I smiled at the pale little boy staring in. How did you get out there? The boy stared at me for a moment. My mom. She's got bad sugar and fell asleep. I couldn't wake her up. I went to get help, but he was crying now, pressing a small hand against the glass. What the fuck was I waiting for? I unlocked the car, but I still hesitated to open the door. I thought back to the story Gene had told. The thing was called the liar because it had to lie. It just wanted to trick you, but if you asked the right question, you could see through it. Taking a deep breath, I looked away from the boy. What's your name? Matthew. People call me Matt. Please let me in. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but when I looked up, the kid just looked worried and scared, not like he'd just said the name of my dead childhood friend. It was a coincidence, and I had to stop this and help him. My hand was on the latch, but I still hesitated. If Gene's story was real, what kind of question would work? Are you a little boy, a little human boy? The boy's eyebrows went up slightly. Yeah. Of course. Wait, that was dumb. If he was lying, he'd say yes. If he was telling the truth, he'd say yes. So that didn't help. Okay. I was running out of time to waste on this. I could ask him if he wasn't a little boy, but it was the same problem, wasn't it? If he was a little boy telling the truth, he'd say no. If he was a monster that had to lie, he'd also say no. Fuck me, I just needed to grow a spine and open the door. Please. I'm getting sleepy, and it scares me. I'm so cold. Shuddering, I found the latch again, determined to finally open the door and let the boy in. Yet in spite of that, I heard myself asking another question. You're not lying to me, just to get me to open the door, are you? I hesitated at the latch, waiting for him to be confused by the oddly worded question, or tell me no. Instead, there was a moment of silence, and when I looked up, I could see the boy's lips were pressed into a thin line. Yes. I frowned, taking my hand away again. Yes, you're not lying to me, or yes you are. His lips began to tremble again. Please let me in. I'm so cold. I needed to think. Him saying yes could mean anything. It was more how he'd reacted, almost like he was angry at a sign of being caught. Still, that wasn't proof of anything. I needed to just, are you outside my car right now? When I met his eyes this time, I thought they seemed darker. Colder. What? Please let me in. I felt a thrill of fear skitter up my back. Answer my question please. Are you outside my car right now? The boy's sniffling stopped as a hard, cruel smile curled up the corners of his mouth. No. Then suddenly, he was gone. I saw a blur of motion in the dark and heard the rustling of some distant brush as something large pushed its way into the woods, but there was no other sign of the child or any other intruder as I sat alone in the freezing dark. After a couple of minutes I got a cell signal back and checked on Peggy. She was doing fine so far, and they'd pass along my message that I'd be there soon. An hour later, the wrecker arrived, and if the man thought it was odd that I refused to get out of my car as he pulled me free from the ditch, he didn't seem to mind. As I write this, I've just gotten back from holding our new baby. He's a healthy little boy, and after just 2 days I already love him so much. My wife asked if I wanted to name him Matthew, after my best friend growing up, but I shook my head quickly. After she's home and rested, I'll try to explain why. Besides, it doesn't matter what we call him. He'll grow up good and strong, and we'll be there to prepare him for a world that can be warm and wonderful, but also very strange and cold. A world where not everything is as it seems, and he has to be very careful. Especially when inviting in a stranger from the dark. The summer before my freshman year of college, my uncle called me up and asked if I'd be willing to help him fix up his cabin during the summer's warm weather. I eagerly agreed, because I hadn't been to the cabin since I was just a little guy, so I was more than excited to go back. Plus, I was basically the only adolescent in the family, and I surely wasn't going to turn down my elderly uncle's request to help with physical labor. A week before I was supposed to head out for the cabin, I got another call from my uncle. Unfortunately, it turned out he had just suffered a pretty severe heart attack. The guy was as strong as an ox and wouldn't let anything knock him on his ass, so I was pretty surprised to hear that he wasn't going to go work on the cabin that summer. He assured me that it would be okay and we could do it next summer, but I had just turned 18 and I was young, dumb, and full of, well, you know. Anyways, I practically begged him to let me go work on the cabin myself, and eventually he did give in. My uncle sent me a list of all the tasks and instructions to help complete them. He only anticipated me being up there for a week or two at max, so that was encouraging. However, when I saw the list I was immediately concerned. It was obvious that my uncle had overestimated my abilities and clearly held nothing back and gave me every task he could think of. I had no idea how to do half the things on that list, so I was expecting to be at that cabin a lot longer than expected. I was wrong. The road to the cabin is long, winding, treacherous, and made of loose dirt. On one side is a large rock face, while the other side looks straight down into a gorge filled with lush green pine trees. I understand that I'm explaining this in a way that makes it sound rather dangerous, and that is true, but I truly can't emphasize the beauty of the landscape. Whether it was the risk of driving off the edge of a cliff, or the excitement of laying eyes on the cabin for the first time in 10 years, I was sweating. I could feel the little beads dribble down my side in an almost ticklish manner, chilling my torso. After around 20 minutes of following that daunting path, I came around the final corner, and there staring back at me was the dilapidated cabin that I loved so dearly. Holy shit, did that thing look rough? You know the cabin from The Evil Dead? Yeah, like that. I immediately knew I had a lot of work cut out for me, but part of me was ecstatic at the thought of completing such difficult chores. I imagined bragging to all my new friends I'd make at college about the time I single-handedly fixed my family's cabin. When I got out of the truck, it was sometime in the late afternoon. I knew I wouldn't be able to get much done that night, so I walked around the property and did a brief inspection of the area. Everything seemed to be just fine. I remember seeing a cluster of grayish fur on one of the trees. I suppose it could have been from a deer, but now looking back at it, I think it was foreshadowing the encounter I would have later that night. After I finished my walkthrough, I wandered over to the small babbling brook that runs along the side of the property and dipped my right hand into the cold mountain stream. I cupped my hand and scooped some of the water into my mouth. The water was clean, clear, and it tasted real. Unfortunately, not many people have the privilege of tasting clean natural water. As I stood up from the creek, I thought about how lucky I was to be there, and for the first time, I really took in my surroundings. While I scanned the tree line and hills that surround the cabin, I suddenly realized that the entire area looked different from how I remembered it. I mean, it all looked the same, but so much more dead. Not only was the cabin way past the point of being rustic, but many of the trees surrounding the property had been turned a sickly brownish gray, and a lot of the grass had either died or been washed away by the heavy rains that frequented the area. While it made me sad to see, it didn't raise any alarms. My dad grew up in Montana and had educated me on pine beetles when we visited his hometown. They were a species of beetle that came from British Columbia and infected many of the forests of the northwestern United States. So, I merely assumed that they were behind the death of many of the trees, and the cabin had simply succumbed to years of neglect after my elderly uncle could no longer make frequent trips up the mountain. At this time, my stomach growled so loud I thought it might have been a frog hiding somewhere in the creek. Upon realizing that it came from my gut, I promptly made my way to the truck, unloaded some of the food and gear, and then headed for the fire pit that sat in front of the cabin. At least, what was left of the fire pit. It clearly hadn't seen use in the last 10 years either. All but two of the small stones, which created an almost perfect circle, still stood in place, and unsurprisingly, there were no charred pieces of firewood or piles of light gray ash to prove that fires had once been common here. So, I gathered some more rocks from the creek to complete the ring, and made my way over to the stockpile of firewood that remained behind the cabin. Thankfully, the wood was covered so rain never got to it, but the thought of a large black widow digging its sleek fangs into my flesh sent chills down my spine. There were all too many spider webs, but thankfully no spiders in sight, so I grabbed 4 medium pieces of wood and made my way back to the fire pit. After stacking the wood over some crumpled up newspapers I'd brought with me, I tossed a match in and took a deep breath as I sat on one of the large logs that bordered the fire. I waited a while for the flames to die down before I skewered a hot dog and began roasting it over the open fire. Nothing beats that feeling. A long day of driving out into the wilderness, topped off with a delicious Hebrew national cooked over a wild flame. Yeah, needless to say, 18-year-old me felt like he was on top of the world right about then. I chowed down on my meal, munching on some chips and sipping on a beer I may or may not have snagged from the fridge before my father could interject. Upon filling my once empty stomach, a cool breeze caused me to shiver, duplicating the sensation of someone breathing down your neck. I swiveled around almost instinctively, and while I didn't explicitly see anything right then, I was pretty sure I heard some branches crunch under something heavy. The feeling of being on top of the world suddenly faded as the true feeling of being alone started to set in. As fast as I could, I threw the remaining food into my bear canister, tied a knot to the top of the canister, and flung it over a nearby branch. There weren't any grizzlies in Central Oregon as far as I knew, but having a mama black bear and her 2 cubs waltz into my campsite was not on my agenda, so I took the necessary precautions regardless. I had originally planned on sleeping inside the cabin, but when I saw the state of the cabin, I quickly decided on sleeping in the truck. Despite being summertime, the sky was quickly flooding with darkness. I grabbed a bucket of water from the creek and put the fire all the way out before making my way for the truck. I sat in the passenger seat, reclined the chair as far back as I could, threw a blanket over myself, and closed my eyes for the night. I woke up in the middle of the night surrounded by blackness and the pounding of rain against the windshield. Initially I assumed that it was the rain which had awoken me, but I was proven wrong when I heard a blood-curdling screech come from the trees. I shot up out of my prone position, made sure all the doors were locked, and put the keys in the ignition. As soon as the truck started, I powered its headlights on. Nothing. I pushed the left lever forward and toggled the truck's blinding high beams on. Nothing, but then I saw movement. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but I thought I could make out antlers, not different from that of an elk. But then it stood up on two legs. The lights caught the creature's eyes, reflecting back an equally blinding light. It raised its wolf-like head and let out a howl that sounded like a mix between a cougar and Godzilla. It then became apparent what the creature was hunched over, the large bloodied corpse of a fully grown American black bear. Its head lowered as it set its sight on the truck, letting out a visible snarl. It dropped what appeared to be the head of the bear from its clawed left hand, as its humanoid body covered in patchy gray fur, began to make its way towards me. I practically jumped into the driver's seat, threw it in reverse, and flung the truck around as fast as possible, narrowly avoiding the creek and somehow not getting stuck in the muddied ground. However, my relief was short-lived when I saw the tree which sat in the middle of the road. I didn't know if the storm toppled the large pine tree, or if the creature back near the cabin was really that powerful. I had no intentions on finding out, but what choices did I have? The only road out was blocked by a collapsed tree, and right behind me was an 8-foot-tall, hulking monstrosity, who just decapitated an adult bear. My questions would soon cease to matter, as I heard the rush of water to my right. I got a quick glance at the brownish tsunami that had been caused by the night's torrential downpour, right before the mudslide shot down the rock face, and swiftly pushed the large truck over the edge of the gorge. I must have blacked out when the truck was hit by the mudslide, because I have no memory of what happened immediately after that. What I do remember is waking up still shrouded in darkness. My ass was wet, with what I assumed to be water which had leaked into the truck from the mudslide. However, I soon realized that whatever I was sitting on was much different from the cushioned seat I was in previously. My vision was foggy and so was my mind, but slowly consciousness crept over me, and I started to realize that I was no longer in the safety of the truck. When I had heard the bear earlier that night, the truck proved to be a safety blanket of sorts. I knew that as long as I was in the truck, I was protected. Well, now I no longer had a safety blanket. And I was most certainly no longer protected. I attempted to stand up, but the ground slid out beneath me as if I was standing on a bunch of marbles. A rattling followed. It was similar to the sound of sticks clacking together. I felt the ground around me and my hands instantly found a round, dry object. I picked it up and tried to figure out what it was based on feeling alone. If it was pitch black outside, wherever I was now was vantablack in comparison. I don't know if it was the concussion that I clearly had or just pure denial, but I knew what I was holding. I didn't want to believe it. A bone of some kind. A bone the size of a pomegranate. A bone with a dome-like structure. A bone with 2 eye sockets. I was not just holding a bone, I was holding a human skull. A child's skull. I dropped it immediately when I realized what I was holding. The crack that echoed through the lair made my heart sink. If that thing was in here, it definitely heard the ruckus I just caused. A few moments passed and I heard nothing. However, light slowly began to filter in through an entrance, revealing my surroundings. There were so many bones, human and animal. The light also revealed that the walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of stone. A little drip from somewhere in the cave echoed, and I started to think about the monster I had seen earlier. I had only encountered it at night, and this was clearly its home. I put two and two together and realized that thing would soon be home upon sunrise. I quickly collected myself and started rummaging around aimlessly, trying to come up with a plan or find a sharp bone or something. I was in a life or death situation, and my lizard brain was going full force. The beast would kill me or I would kill it. After rummaging for a few minutes, I heard another screech come from outside. It wasn't in the cave yet, but it was coming home soon. Right then, my eyes caught the bright green fabric of a large backpack. I scrambled through the bones and made my way over to the bag, which upon closer inspection was still attached to its owner. Needless to say, there wasn't much left of him besides the rib cage that the bag strap was caught on. I yanked and yanked, eventually hearing the snap of a rib breaking off. As soon as the bag was in my hands, I reached for the zipper. Digging through the bag's pouches, I found some rotten food, presumably a sandwich they had packed for a day hike, some socks, an empty water bottle, and a flare gun. I let out a small yelp of excitement, thinking that I had found what may just save my life. Just then I heard another screech, much louder this time, pounding off the walls of the damp cavern. Just moments later I heard the thumping of footsteps enter the cave. I did my best to recreate the position I had awoken in. I didn't have the time to make an elaborate plan, but I came up with something that might just save my life. My eyes were closed, but I could hear it closing in on me. I held the flare gun under my back in my right hand, waiting for just the right moment. I soon felt its warm breath hit my face like a train hitting a brick wall. The stench was unbearable, a combination of decomposing tissue and rotting teeth. I held my breath as best I could, but when it let out another screech point blank, I vomited a little in my mouth. I'm lucky it didn't deafen me, but the small burp I let out surely let it know I was wide awake. I opened my eyes. It roared again, spewing stinking slobber all over me. I took my chance and raised the small red firearm directly into its snout and pulled the trigger. Click click, fucking work, god damn it. I yelled in the same way one might yell a battle cry, pulling the trigger once more. Bang! The bright red flare shot instantly into the beast's mouth, soaring into the back of its throat. It staggered, clearly thrown off guard by the bizarre stunt I had just pulled. It screeched. This time, however, the screech ended in a whimper, as its wolf-like head popped like a balloon. Each of its eyeballs burst out of their sockets as red cracks began to form all over its head, and soon enough those cracks began to glow a vibrant red. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cracked a small but short-lived smile as each individual piece of the skull splattered the cave walls. I heard the antlers bounce off the stone of the cave and eventually clatter to the floor. The body wobbled as the knees grew weak under the weight of its enlarged abdomen and collapsed to the ground. I stood up, dropped the flare gun and started to make my victorious limp to the mouth of the cave. I took one last look at the hideous remains that lay in front of me, still spewing blood out of the neck. Even though its brain matter painted all the surrounding surfaces, it still made me shiver in fear. I thought of each piece flying back into place, as if someone had recorded it and played it in reverse. With that disturbing thought, I decided I didn't want to wait around and see if it would happen or not, so I hobbled the rest of the way out of the cave. When I got out, I looked back into the darkness one more time. No eyes peered back at me, nothing came running out to get me. It was just me and the darkness. I followed the creek, and it brought me back to the spot where I had previously indulged on some delicious mountain water. With familiar surroundings around me, I began to relax somewhat, but still shivered from the aftershock of adrenaline. From there I followed the road down to where the truck was pushed over the edge. When I got there, there was still some muddy water running down the cliff in the form of a small waterfall, but for the most part the rain had come to an end, and the wave of mud had come as quickly as it had gone. I peered over the edge and saw the bright red truck upside down about 100 feet downhill. I thought about going down and grabbing my phone from the truck, but with my bum leg I knew it would be too risky. So, I made my way down the road by foot. By the time I reached another house, my legs were aching, and my head pounded so hard I thought my skull was going to explode too. The light orange of sunrise had begun to fade into the darker tone of sunset. I must have been walking for at least 8 hours, and I was exhausted. I made it up the 4 steps, knocked on the large wood door, and collapsed. About 2 hours later I woke once again, this time in a greenish-blue bed. I was now wearing a spotted white gown, and had an IV pumping into my arm. I instantly recognized my surroundings as the hospital, and rested my head on the pillow, letting out a sigh of relief. It wasn't until the next morning that I would speak with anyone. My parents drove the same long trek one did the day prior, the previous night, and got to the hospital later than they would have liked. However, they let me get my much-needed rest, and then proceeded to grill me the next morning. Me and your mother are so proud of you for making it to the Hendersons' property, son. And we are so thankful that you're still with us. But please tell us what happened out there. My dad's voice shook as tears formed in his eyes. I scanned the room and saw that there were 2 cops standing on the opposite side of me. I sat up on the bed and then proceeded to tell them exactly what happened, not leaving out one detail. They were obviously very skeptical, but I had shown up on a stranger's doorstep covered in blood that wasn't mine, and as far as they knew I was alone up there. I felt like I needed to tell my story the way it happened, regardless of the fear of being judged. And thankfully, they believed me. A week later I was sitting in bed with a cast, watching movies, and playing video games, when my family was contacted by the police. Apparently they had found the cave, and the bones, and they were able to match the bones to around 30 missing campers, hikers, and hunters that had been stalked, killed, and dragged to the bottom of the cave. They claimed that my encounter was actually some feral cannibal that decided to wear an animal's head over his own. That's some bullshit, huh? Anyways, that happened around 7 years ago. Nowadays I teach biology at a community college near Seattle. That encounter changed my life forever, and not just mentally. I know the police were wrong, not because of my memory, but because I still have the foot-long scars that its claws left on my back. After my experience, apparently they demolished the cabin to prevent other potential feral people from taking shelter there, and they gated off the road. My uncle passed away a few months later, but not before I got to tell him what happened. He was astounded to hear about it, but he was aware of the cave. He told me that he had explored the cave when he was younger, only to find nothing. I recently heard of a very similar incident in Oregon not too far from where my uncle's cabin used to be. I know that whatever I encountered is long dead, but if someone else had a similar run-in, does that mean there are more of them? I don't know for sure, but I want to find out, which is exactly why I'm going to Oregon next week to interview the victim. 3 weeks ago, Cheryl Winslow was found several miles downstream from her campsite, washed ashore the Grand Ronde River near the town of Rogersburg, Oregon. While Cheryl herself didn't sustain any injuries, save for near drowning, hypothermia, and a minor concussion, her husband Howard and 7-year-old daughter Violet were found half-eaten and mutilated among the forest floor. The bottom half of the 6'3", 195-pound man was all that was left of him, until the police noticed his left arm dangling from a pine tree. A bloody trail followed the headless torso of the child. Police labeled it as a feral human attack, the same bullshit excuse they gave me when I encountered the same creature that brutalized a man and his daughter. What it really is, who knows for sure. Based on its physical appearance and lust for human blood, a lot of you seem to think that it's a Wendigo. I don't know if that's true or if it's a mother chimera of a beast, but nonetheless I appreciate the help from you guys on that last post. A lot of you provided some really insightful information. The main reason why Cheryl's story stuck out to me so much was that it was the only one I'd heard with such a high level of brutality similar to mine. Many people report seeing cryptids walk or run between some trees in the distance, or report hearing some blood-curdling scream. While these encounters might be legitimate, the gruesomeness is what concerns me. These creatures aren't some passive cryptid like a Bigfoot or a skunk ape. They are apex predators that will devour any living thing in their path. I had called Cheryl just before I posted the first part of my story, and she agreed to have an interview with me. I drove down to Pendleton, Oregon 2 days ago and conducted that interview. As you will soon see, it was thought-provoking to say the least. I recorded the conversation on my phone. Most of this post will be dialogue, so it'll essentially serve as a transcription of the interview. I know some people can be squeamish even towards textual gore, so here's your graphic content warning. Things are about to get pretty dark. Hi Cheryl, how are you today? Things have been hard lately, but today has been better than the last, so that's something I guess. You should know that it's okay to not feel okay during a time like this. I know how devastating it can be. I truly am sorry for your loss. Thank you, Peter, I really do appreciate it. Of course. So, Cheryl, I want to do this in a way that respects your grieving process. I want you to start us off wherever you're comfortable. Thank you. A couple weeks back we planned a short camping trip. The entire hike was gorgeous. The hills are so beautiful this time of year. The day was an absolute blast. Violet caught crawdads in the river, while Howard and I cooked hot dogs over a small fire by the river's shore. Hot dogs, a classic. What's your wiener of choice? Haha, Hebrew Nationals anyways. Everything was great up until we started getting ready for bed. Good choice. Sorry, on what happened? When you went to bed. Howard and I put Violet to bed in her little tent and then began to change into our pajamas. Right before we hopped into bed, Violet came over to the front of our tent needing to go to the bathroom. Howard put on his headlamp and went with Violet into the woods to go pee. After a while they hadn't come back, so I decided to go out looking for them. I knew which way they had gone, so I decided to put on a headlamp of my own and follow them out into the forest. I probably made it 200 feet before I noticed the flashing. I'm sorry, the flashing. Yes, I didn't know what it was at first either, but then I got close enough for my headlamp to shine on this thing. It was horrible. It had this dark black fur. And these horrible antlers. But oh god, the face. When that thing looked at me I saw evil incarnate, because that's when I noticed the flashing was Howard. The creature had his torso entirely inside its canine mouth like a snake eating an egg. I have never been so terrified in my life, Peter. As the creature shook its muzzle, the headlamp my husband wore shook too. Christ, Cheryl, I'm so sorry. Do you need a moment? No, it's okay. Let's just continue. Okay, but feel free to take your time. Okay. Before I turned from the creature and ran, I caught a glimpse of my daughter. I'm sorry, maybe I do need to take a break. That's totally fine, I'll wait here. You take your time. Cheryl was very distraught to say the least. I knew she would be, as would any mother who just lost her closest loved ones. Cheryl's story was important to me, not just because I wanted answers, but also because I knew Cheryl wanted her story to be heard. I should also let you know that she consented to the release of her interview. Tears had formed in her eyes when her husband came up in conversation, but they began pouring when Violet came into the discussion. About 10 minutes later, Cheryl came back into the dining room. Okay, I think I'm ready. No worries, like I said, I want your grieving to be respected. You said you turned and ran from the creature when it looked at you. Oh, yeah, although, the past couple days I've been wishing I hadn't. Life has been so painful without them. But, when I ran I ended up running straight into the frigid river, hoping that whatever was behind me wasn't a great swimmer. I fell unconscious after a few minutes. Eventually I washed ashore nearby on the opposite side of the river. Some young couple skinny dipping in the river found me. If it weren't for them, I'd have died from hypothermia. Wow. Cheryl, thank you for sharing this all with me. I know how hard it can be to share a seemingly fantastical story, but I wholeheartedly believe every word you've said. I appreciate you talking with me today. Do you mind if I ask you a few follow-up questions before I head out? Actually, I know you mentioned that you had an experience of your own over the phone. What happened? Oh, Well, basically I had visited an old cabin that belonged to my uncle. I agreed to help him work on it over the summer, but he suffered a heart attack a week before we were supposed to leave. I ended up going out there alone. It was admittedly a foolish thing. That night I saw a creature in the forest. I attempted to leave the cabin in my truck, but a mudslide pushed the truck over a cliff. The creature found me unconscious and dragged me from the truck back to its cave. Jesus. Yeah. Thankfully, I think they enjoy hunting more than feeding on the dead. It left me in its cave as it went back out to hunt. In a Deus Ex Machina type moment, I found an old flare gun in a backpack belonging to one of the creature's previous victims. When it came back, I shot the flare down its throat. Its head weight, you killed it. Somehow, yeah I did. I don't know how I got so lucky. Fuck this. If you killed that one, I bet we can kill the one that took my Howie and Violet. Wait, Cheryl, you can't be serious. These things possess otherworldly levels of aggression and capability for violence. I know you're angry, but I can't let you put your life in harm's way after you barely got away once. I have nothing left, Peter. Nothing. My parents both died from cancer, and my younger brother was killed in a car crash 2 years ago. Howard and Violet were the only family I had. I'm not asking you to come with me, all I needed to know is that these things bleed. I stopped the recording there. After several futile attempts to keep Cheryl from getting herself killed, I offered to go out to Hell's Canyon with her to hunt this thing. No known cave systems exist near the Winslow's campsite, but Hell's Canyon is home to dozens of caverns. Cheryl is hoping that we find the right one. I don't know what I'm hoping for. Stay tuned, I'll make sure to update you guys when we get back from our expedition, if we make it back. Before I tell you what happened out at Hell's Canyon, it's with great sadness that I must tell you it is not Peter narrating this story. It is I, Cheryl Winslow. I hold a great deal of guilt. It was my fault that Peter went out there in the first place. It's my fault that he didn't make it back. Peter was worried something like this might end up happening, so he gave me his account information in case I made it back alive. I'm sorry. This is all my fault. Upon Peter's departure from my house here in Pendleton, I contacted a couple friends of mine. Rita, an old college pal and an expert hunter who also knew Hell's Canyon like the back of her tattooed hand. As well as Kenneth, a mercenary-type militant that used to be one of my husband's co-workers. He's a cook, but I knew we would need some firepower out there. Just after the interview was published, we met up at the Dalles and loaded into my Jeep Cherokee, heading for the border of Oregon and Idaho. Hell's Canyon is absolutely gorgeous. I would highly recommend going out to visit it if you get the chance, but as you may soon discover, it might not be the vacation spot it was once considered to be. We followed a winding dirt road through the hillsides, which eventually led us into a wooded valley surrounding the Snake River that Rita suggested we take. She said that it looked promising. Boy, was she right. I hopped out of the driver's seat and swung the heavy black door shut. Y'all ready? Rita looked at me, raising an eyebrow as if to question my intelligence. Y'all? Really, Cheryl? What, are we in fucking Louisiana? She said with a grin on her face while pulling a hunting rifle and a box of .308 ammunition from the car. Peter chimed in, hey, this is serious. We're here. It's go time. We can't be dicking around, it could cost us our lives. These animals aren't anything to be taken lightly. Kenneth spoke up while loading his 12-gauge Winchester pump shotgun. What's wrong with Louisiana, Rita? My mama was born on the bayou, you know. He cocked the shotgun, expelling a red shotgun slug as he spit out the moist brown glob of Copenhagen he'd been chewing on. Rita glanced at me yet again, obviously suspicious of the gun-toting redneck I'd invited. Of course she was. She scoffed and began loading the large rounds into her own rifle. We gonna have an issue, Missy, Kenneth said, still glaring at Rita. Frustrated, Rita turned away from the car as she pulled the metal bolt of the matte black rifle back, chambering a round. Nope. Her shortness enforcing the notion that they would in fact have an issue. Come on guys, let's get going. we're already behind schedule," Peter said sternly, slinging his pack over his right shoulder. Reaching out, he pulled a Colt M1911 from a hand Kenneth had extended in his direction, holstering it immediately. "Where's mine, Kenny?" I asked him, implying that I was eager to get my hands on a firearm as well, something that would almost never occur at any other point in my life. Kenneth reached both arms into the back of the Cherokee. He let out a muffled grunt as he retrieved something from the trunk. "Well, Ms. Cheryl, this one I brought just for you." Grinning ear to ear, he then revealed an R-15 equipped with a holographic sight and a foregrip. "Jesus Christ. What is this fucking desert storm?" Rita shouted. Kenneth, now visibly irritated, snapped back, "Do you see any ragheads round here, bitch?" This sent my 1/4 Pakistani, although you could hardly tell, friend into a fit of rage. "What did you just say, you son of a bitch? You might have some big guns, but I could kill you with my bare fucking hands, you inbred prick." Before a fist or firefight could break out, Peter stepped in between the two polar opposites, raising his arms. "Knock this shit off, you two. You're gonna have to set your differences aside if we're going to make it out of this forest alive." Lowering his arms and shaking his head, Peter scoffed as he began the trek into the woods. "Come on, let's move." Rita and Kenneth gave each other one final glare before we put on our packs, following after Peter. Eventually Rita took the lead, being our Hell's Canyon expert. She led our single file line of misfits through the woods. Behind her was Peter, behind Peter was me, and behind me was Kenneth. Despite the two's altercation early on, Rita and Kenneth managed to suck down their pride, most likely due to Peter's intimidating tone. After all, he was the only one who'd managed to kill one of the creatures. If anyone knew what we were up against, it was him. Rita led us down towards the edge of the Snake River and turned around to face us. "All right, the first cave is about half a mile south of here. Are you guys sure you're ready?" I could tell that Rita had begun questioning the safety of our hunting trip. "Yup. It's now or never, let's do this," I replied, faking as much confidence as I could. I nodded my head, and Rita began to guide us southbound towards the cavern. We walked in silence. No one wanted to admit it, but fear was plaguing all of our hearts. After 20 minutes of trudging through thick brush and bramble, the wooded area opened up, revealing a rock face with a small, pitch-black gap just barely large enough to crawl into. Kenneth stopped in his tracks and threw his hands up in the air. "Oh hell no. I am not going in that fucking hole." Rita, instantly recognizing this opportunity, replied sardonically, "Don't be a pussy, Kenny," simultaneously glaring and grinning at Kenneth. Kenneth plopped his semi-overweight bottom down on a nearby rock, set his shotgun on the ground, and leaned back, putting his hands behind his head. "You are what you eat." A smug grin grew on his face as we all let out an audible groan. Peter, not wanting to give Kenneth any attention, began to debrief us. "Okay, whatever. Kenny, you stay up here, I guess you can keep watch. You two, let's get our headlamps on and do this thing." Sweat dribbled down the side of Peter's head, possibly from the warm thick air, possibly from the fear of what was yet to come. Rita and I nodded in agreement as we set down our packs and reached into one of the top pockets, pulling out LED headlamps with black straps. "Yes sir," Rita replied as she strapped her lamp on. "Let's do this." Rita once again led our descent into the dark cavern, hunting rifle on her back swaying as she crawled through the small opening. After a few minutes of claustrophobic crawling, muffled grunts, and several scrapes which had accumulated on our arms, the cavern expanded. Peter pulled a red flare from his back pocket. Upon striking the flare, the damn cave was illuminated with a bright red light. "Here we are," Peter declared, pulling the handgun from his leather holster and sliding the hammer back, double-checking that the pistol was in fact loaded. Rita swung the hunting rifle from her back and into the palms of her calloused hands. "So, what do we do if we see one of these things?" Peter, straight-faced, turned around and answered Rita's question. "Shoot it. Till it drops to the fucking floor." He turned back around and began to lead us further down into the cave. Eventually, we came across a solid rock wall blocking any further movement. "Shit, dead end." I said, frustrated that we hadn't found what we were looking for, relieved that we hadn't found our demise. Back to square one, Peter said, letting out a sigh as he began to trudge back up to the mouth of the cave. We successfully managed to crawl out of the cave and back into the bright, eastern Oregon sunshine. However, as we exited the cave, all three of us immediately noticed something. Kenneth was gone. Peter, cupping his hands around his mouth, began to shout into the woods, "Kenny! Kenny! Kenny, where are you? Fuck!" Just then, something cracked on the forest floor. We all swiveled around immediately. Walking out from beneath the dark canopy was a 6-foot-tall figure. It was Kenneth. Zipping up his dirty jeans and presumably wiping piss on the blue denim, he cracked a smile and exclaimed, "You didn't think one of them beasties got me, did ya? Christ, Kenny. What the fuck?" I yelled, furious that he hadn't either peed closer to the cave or just held it in. Rita rolled her eyes. "Oh, thank goodness," she responded, once again slinging the rifle behind her back. I did the same. After the initial spelunking mission, we investigated 5 more similar limestone caverns to no avail, before setting up camp for the night. We had found a small clearing in the woods and unrolled our sleeping bags, lit a small campfire, and began to discuss our next move. Peter sat upon a log near the fire pulling a can of warm Pabst Blue Ribbon from his pack. He began brainstorming. "There's a shit ton of caves in this area. It could take weeks, maybe months before we thoroughly explore each one of them. Maybe we should just call it a trip and head out in the morning. We can always potentially come back after we do some more research." He sipped the warm beer, grimacing. "Fuck that. We have plenty of supplies. We can stay out here for at least a week before we need to head back into town. I'm not leaving until we find something," I frustratingly replied, my mind clouded with the thought of revenge, not heeding the warning Peter had given us. "Makes no difference to me. I'll take any opportunity to spend a night underneath the night sky." Rita laid on top of her insulated, blue sleeping bag. Standing up, she declared, "Hey, I have to pee, I'll be right back." We all turned towards her. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" I asked, remembering what had happened earlier with Kenneth. She nodded her head, her thick brown hair bobbed along with it, illuminated by the orange light of the campfire. "Yeah, I have a shy bladder. Pete, can I take your Colt with me? Prefer to be caught with my pants down holding a handgun, rather than scrambling for my bolt action." "Yeah, sure, here you go." Peter stood up from his log and leaned over towards Rita, handing her the small, silver hand cannon. "Thanks, I'll be right back. Save the beer for me?" Rita asked, smiling, before heading into the woods. Peter raised his white can in her direction. "You got it." Just like that, my friend had vanished into the darkness of the thick wooded region. She had grown up with divorced parents. Her mom taught her the ways of activism and strength through femininity, while her dad taught her the ways of the hunter and strength through nature. I trusted her to be on her own, even more so than Kenneth, our resident militant. Speaking of the gun nut, Kenneth had set his shotgun against the side of a pine tree and zipped open his large green pack, pulling out a small yellow cooler. "We can stay here a couple nights, but I think we need to go back to town and rethink our strategy. If we're gonna find anything, this is easily the least efficient way to do so," Peter said, taking another sip from his beer and staring at the pine needle riddled ground. I sighed, sucking down my pride. "Yeah, maybe that's not the worst idea." I kicked at the ground, sending clumps of dirt and sap towards the campfire. Kenneth pulled a square, yellow, plastic package from his cooler. Ripping open the package, he pulled a stick of cold meat out and slid it onto a stick he'd sharpened with his pocket knife, raising it above the crackling flame as it began to sizzle. "Shit, not a bad idea, Kenny," Peter said while also reaching into his pack, pulling out a small Ziploc baggie with a turkey sandwich inside. "You should eat, Cheryl, you'll need the calories." Peter held out half the sandwich in my direction. Accepting the small meal, I replied softly, "Thanks, are you sure we ain't just hunting a lost grizzly?" Kenneth questioned, slowly looking up from the fire towards me. Infuriated, I laid into him. What the fuck, Kenny? You and Howard were close friends, and you're gonna sit there and say that a bear did that to him? Fuck off, you've been nothing but intolerable this entire fucking excursion. I don't even know why I asked you to tag along. I moved my gaze from Kenny's alarmed face to the dirty ground beneath my feet. Damn, well, sorry, is all he Kenneth had to say before a sound that can only be described as an audible version of the Holocaust rattled through the forest. Peter dropped the sandwich in shock and scanned the forest as Kenny's face grew ghostly pale. We then turned to face the thudding coming from behind us. We all swung our bodies towards the stomping, and in similar fashion as earlier in the day, Rita burst through the dark forest's edge. Panting, Rita bent over and put her hands on her knees. Holy shit. What the fuck was that? Frozen in fear, none of us had time to answer her as a hulking shadowy mass slowly formed behind my dear old friend. The same shadowy mass that killed my husband and daughter. Confused as to why we hadn't responded, Rita began, What's before she was interrupted. A large, furry, brown, clawed hand with a palm the size of a dinner plate wrapped its razor-sharp talons around Rita's skull. She barely had time to scream or fight back before the thing twisted her head off of her spine like the cap of a beer bottle. Her lifeless body fell to the ground with a loud thud. Her head, eyes rolled back, still in the clutches of the beast's left hand. The monster tightened its grip around Rita's skull. A wet crunch let out through the air as her head was reduced to pink mush lined with dark hair. Oh fuck. Let's get out, Kenneth shouted. But before he could even think to stand up, a pair of antlers which resembled a Norwegian black metal band's logo burst through his rib cage. Being raised up into the air, his flailing body vomited up a few globs of blood before the second beast, with gray fur, stood up at a towering 10 feet tall, pulled him from its antlers, and ripped him in half vertically like a piece of fleshy construction paper. Blood showered Peter and I. As the droplets collided with the campfire, a quick sizzle escaped the hot orange flame. The 6-foot-long halves of Kenneth dropped to the ground, squishing and expelling more gore from his insides. Peter dove for Kenny's Winchester, which still leaned upon one of the nearby trees. Cheryl. Start running. Peter shouted in my direction, whilst he grabbed a shotgun and aimed for the gray monstrosity that now lunged at him. Bang! Peter pulled the shotgun's trigger, nailing the creature in its left shoulder, staggering it as it let out a harsh screech. The blood coursing through my veins had been replaced with dread, but nonetheless I took this opportunity and made a mad dash in the direction of the car. It was over 2 miles away, but it was the only chance of escape we had. Peter followed. And so did the brown creature, eventually followed by the gray one once it had regained its balance. R-15 pounding against my back, I sprinted through the forest, crunching twigs and leaves as I dodged thick tree trunks in the night shroud of darkness. After making it about 150 feet, I foolishly took a peek over my shoulder, just in time to see the same large brown hand reaching for my head as it did Rita's. Eyes widened with visceral terror, the palm met the top of my skull, plucking me up off the ground, as if I were an ant. I screamed, kicked, and swatted at the creature as it licked its muzzle with a long, wet purple tongue. In an instant, accompanied by a blinding flash and a deafening crack, the creature's cranium was tore from its skull, as a slug left the barrel of the Winchester, sending me onto my ass and its lifeless body to the ground. Fucking go, Cheryl. Peter commanded towards me, as a large gray hand grabbed him by his upper leg and dangled him in the air. With a swift rip, the creature had gripped Peter's shoulder and separated his torso from his legs, spilling his entrails onto the ground with a sickening plop. Peter met his gruesome fate because I chose to go out there. The guilt I feel is immeasurable. All 3 of my friends had been murdered by these beasts, and I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I reached behind my back and yanked the high-powered assault rifle into my hands, left hand on the foregrip and right index finger on the trigger. With a mix of rage, terror, and self-preservation, I let out a shrill scream as my finger rapidly pressed down on the heavy trigger. sending dozens of 5.56 rounds flying out of the barrel and into the forest. Not one hit the creature. At least, not until the final click did a round leave the chamber and soar directly into the creature's right eyeball. The eye erupted, spewing blood and optic fluid like a volcano of gore, as the thing let out the worst noise I'd ever heard. Now holding its bloodied eye with its right hand, the thing snarled at me one more time before trotting into the darkness on all fours, whimpering. I wish I could have stayed and mourned my dear friends, but I knew that I couldn't let their deaths be meaningless. I had to make it out of Hell's Canyon alive. By the time I made it back to the car, it was dawn, the gentle blues and oranges reflecting off the windshield of my black Jeep Cherokee. Thankfully, I had remembered to attach the car keys to a carabiner and clipped it to my belt. I removed the keys and opened the car door. As I put the keys into the ignition, the thought of my friends' corpses swam through my mind. I drove to the closest ranger station and alerted them to what had happened. Simultaneously dumbfounded and suspicious, they went out to where I had just left. Hours passed before they came back. Ultimately, they couldn't figure out what happened. There were no remains found of either my friends or the monster. Just 4 red grease marks on the forest floor. I wish I could give you a happy ending to this story. I wish I could tell you it's safe to go into the woods, but I cannot in good faith do either. I'm sorry for all of this. Please, beware the creatures that roam eastern Oregon. They've taken everything from me and they'll just as quickly take everything from you. My name is Bill Greenfield, and I used to own Wayward Video. Wayward Video was ahead of its time, a VHS rental business that was accessed through catalog. You'd be given one catalog at the beginning of the month and had the option to order up to 5 VHS tapes for the entire month for the low price of $29.99. The tapes would arrive in the mail, and when your month was up, you'd send them back to Wayward Video. My entire business operated out of my small trailer in the small town of Gosmer, on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It was just me, my cousin Johnny, and my dog Gator. Gator was the brains of the operation, as most of the time Johnny and I sat around smoking things we'd find in the desert and shooting the shit. As far as our business, it was fairly profitable. I'd just received the orders, go to my shed specifically built to store the movies, and keep them in good, cool conditions, package and mail them. Johnny would make the trek to town, and mail about 10 to 15 videos a day. It was enough business to keep our lot rent paid, and provide us with a nicer cushion of money than our neighbors in the trailer park. The other end of Wayward Video was the return of said VHS movies. Most customers rented the maximum 5 tapes, and sometimes, you wouldn't get all 5 tapes back. Other times, the films would be damaged or taped over. Let's just say, I saw a lot of personal things on the tapes I probably shouldn't have. On the hot desert nights, Johnny and I would sit in HQ, our little air-conditioned shed that held our wares, crack open a cold one, and check the return VHS tapes for damage. Each one only took a few minutes, as we'd skip through fairly quickly, however we never missed a defect in the tapes. One grueling and hot night in the arid landscape, Johnny, Gator and I were up late, reviewing the week's return tapes. We had 2 different orders that had returned that day, the first being 3 children's tapes, and the second untouched and not examined. After sitting through The Land Before Time, The Never-Ending Story and The Last Unicorn, my patience for the last film was thin. While it only took a few minutes, it never ceased to jar me, seeing those movies zip by so fast like that. It always made me think, is this how God sees us? Flashes of our defining moments, whizzing by and soon forgotten. I didn't like the thought. Well, Johnny, Gator, think y'all can finish up? That animated crap gave me a headache. I said with a yawn. Come on Bill, it's one more movie. You can't do one more out here with me. You know I don't like it out here on my own. Johnny protested, bushy blonde eyebrows curling up in slight anguish. "You're not the one who's gotta wake up and package all those dang tapes, Johnny boy. You'll be fine. Sides, you got Gator." In response to his name, the mutt looked up at me with his big, brown, puppy dog eyes. Gator whimpered as I reached for the last tape and examined the package it came in. Regina Fairway, 1732 McKinley Boulevard, Las Vegas, Nevada. The address wasn't from too far away. Most of our clients were from the Southwest, as we charged more based on the distance. I carefully removed the VHS tape from the package and read the label. Heathers. I had heard of that movie at the time. Back then I thought it was some chick flick about catty high school drama. Having seen it now, I was mostly correct. I popped it in the small VHS player, hooked up the microscopic box set TV we had in there just for the purpose of checking the tapes out. "Have fun with this one, and don't worry, I won't tell anyone you like this kinda stuff," I said with a laugh, turning to leave. "Screw you, man," I heard as I took my leave of the shed. As I stepped into the oppressive heat, I mused to myself about how well Johnny and I really were doing. Right now, our idea was still small, but we really had the potential to change the game. For the time, our service was way ahead of the game. There was no streaming, and not everyone wanted to track to Blockbuster or Mammoth Video every day for a film. I glanced at my shed, light from the movie screen slipping through the crack of the door frame. The hum of the air conditioner doing its job satiated my need for peace, and I made my way to my trailer. I walked through the hallowed halls of the bachelor pad sanctuary I shared with my cousin and descended to my haven. My waterbed called to me in a siren song, and I stripped down to my whitey-tighties and clambered in. Morning came like a crashing wave to a serene shore, and I woke feeling great. I did make note of the fact that my mutt had never joined me that night, but wrote it off. "Gator," I called, hoping to see the hound bounding down the narrow hallway to my room. Nothing. I frowned deeply and got dressed for the day. When I was done, I went to knock on Johnny's door. His door was adorned with an employees only sign he had stolen from a diner we frequented as teenagers. When no response to my knock came, I gingerly opened his door. The odorous waft of his room hit me before the realization that it was empty did. This was weird and set off an alarm. Johnny never woke before me. He was always up until 2 or 3 in the morning watching those personal videos we found, drinking beer and smoking whatever he found to his liking. Worry swirled inside me like the bubbles in Johnny's lava lamp he had forgotten to turn off. I must take a moment to emphasize how important Johnny was to me. Johnny wasn't just some cousin I had bunked with for convenience. He was my best friend in the world. His parents wandered off into the desert to get high on paid when he was a boy and never came back. My family welcomed him into ours like he had always been there. Johnny had spent everything he ever earned or inherited helping me start Wayward Video, and despite his lack of hygiene, intelligence or wit, Johnny was a good man to his core. I couldn't see Johnny getting up and leaving in the middle of the night for any logical reason, and where we live, that's not too bright of an idea. A thought struck me at that moment that put the panic to rest. The dumb drunk idiot probably fell asleep in the darn shed, and that's where I'd find Gator too. I sighed and set myself on the path to the shed. Approaching the shed, I took a moment to examine the exterior as something seemed off about it. No hum. There was no air conditioning. That was strange, because it was easily 110 degrees, and I just could not see how Johnny could comfortably sleep in the stuffy shed when it was that hot out. I trepidatiously tuned the handle and cracked open the door. "Johnny. Gator. Are you here?" I said in a hushed tone. The light of the open door did not illuminate much, and it appeared as though the TV had lost power as well, because there was no light from that to show Johnny's whereabouts either. "Get out, Bill." I heard it come from somewhere in the shed, however I had no idea where it was coming from. I heard a low growl next, and cautiously stepped back as I spoke. "Johnny. Are you guys all right?" What's going on, man? Why is it so dark? My body was outside of the shed, and I was shaking with fear. Thoughts danced in my head and floated around. I breathed in the hot, damp air from that damned shed and prayed to God I got clued into whatever was going on and quick. I set out, Bill. I heard Johnny scream as the shed door slammed shut. This was so out of character for Johnny. Even when he was mad as a hornet he didn't raise his voice like that. The words he spoke were dripping with so much anger and hatred toward me too. I was simply bewildered. I then thought of my poor dog, that he could kill him, and surely he didn't have any water. If my cousin wouldn't let me help him, at least I could help Gator. John, I need you to send Gator out. He can't be in there, he's gonna need some food and water. In response, I heard the unmistakable growl of my dog, the kind of growl Gator used the one time a coyote was walking around our trailer. I huffed and stomped off, going back into my home. I prepared a small lunch for Johnny for when he decided he was going to start acting like a person again, grabbed some bottles of water and some food for Gator. I grabbed the keys to our shared truck and headed outside. I set the items outside HQ and knocked. Look man, I don't know what you saw, or if it was the joke I made, but I'm genuinely sorry. I'm worried about you and Gator. I put some food out here, some water. I'm headed to town, gonna stop orders for the month. We can take a break from all this. Rest up man, we'll talk when I get back. And with that, I trudged to the orange Dodge parked next to our trailer and left. Downtown Gossamer was only 20 minutes from our small trailer park, and not too rough of a drive, however it was separated by a desert. Staring into the desert, some say you see things, but in all my years, I never experienced that. I truly believe that the empty landscape forces one to look within themselves, and most folks would rather see a little green man than deal with inadequacy. The cacti dispersed and led into small buildings, which melted away into bigger ones, and soon I was in downtown Gossamer. I parked my truck in front of the post office, grabbed my ledger, that lived on the passenger seat, and headed inside. When inside, I wrote a newsletter to all 187 of my recurring clients, explaining that an incident at our warehouse would cause us to shut down operations for 1 month to complete repairs. While this was horse crap, I didn't want to tell them that my cousin was having some kind of breakdown. I made copies and sent them out to our mailing list. I then made my way to the bank across the street, where I suspended all of the charges to my clients, much to the branch manager's chagrin. This would run me a pretty penny. Most of my customers would be understanding, but I was bound to lose business in all of this. Still, I could tell something serious was going on with Johnny, and I knew I had no choice in this. Hopefully, I'd be able to figure this out and get my business back on track. I finished my outing with a trip to the diner, and I got a table for one. My waitress was a high school sweetheart of Johnny's, Sarah Jane. "Where's that stud muffin that's always tied to your hip, Bill?" she said in a flirty tone. Well, sick, I suppose," I said nervously, not wanting to out Johnny as a budding lunatic. That boy could never hold his liquor. "Tell him I said hi, won't ya?" "Of course, Sarah Jane. Anything for a sweet girl like you," I said, regaining my charm. The lunch was hollow without Gator and Johnny. I felt afraid, alone and empty. Everything that was important to me looked like it might slip away, and here I was, eating my feelings in our crappy local diner. I had to find out what was going on with Johnny. I waved Sarah Jane over. "Sarah, have you ever seen Heathers? The girl movie?" She laughed a bit. "Why, yes I have. Luann and I saw it at the Cineplex 10. It's not that much of a girl movie." "What about it?" "Well, is it real messed up or something?" I said, cautiously. "I wouldn't say children should watch it, but a big ol' man like you should be just fine." "What do they call it?" "PG-13. Couple people die, but no blood or nothing." "Does this have something to do with your VHS store?" "Yeah, I paused to think of a lie. This lady wrote me a letter saying it made her kid act weird, that's all. Well, then he was probably already soft in the head, the movie is fine. Don't feel bad. That sentence made my heart sink. Was Johnny soft in the head? I didn't think so, but something was wrong with him. I finished my meal, somber and scared. Leaving Sarah Jane a hearty tip, I made my way to my truck and headed home. The desert called to me on my ride home, the wind howling and pushing against my truck. As I approached my trailer, I made note of the air conditioner loudly whirring from the shed and the items I had left undisturbed. Anger filled me as I ripped open the door to my truck and stormed to the shed. "Johnny, enough of this. Get out of there," I said sternly, approaching the shed. I didn't bother to knock, I busted right through the door and forced myself into the cool, damp shed and smelled Johnny before I saw him. The smell was that of human and dog waste, topped off with a light nuance of sweat. The shelves upon shelves of VHS tapes were all torn down, tape spewing out of them like a disemboweled cat. Our stock was completely destroyed. Then my eyes fixed to Johnny and Gator. Both sat in front of the TV, eyes fixed to every movement, and both of them growling softly as I approached. Slowly, I walked closer to them, the smell assaulting me with each step. I reached to Johnny, but before I did, his head whipped in my direction. Gone were the baby blue eyes, soft and gentle. Johnny's eyes were angry and bloodshot, his face pale and skin tight. It was as though in the day he had been in here, he had changed immensely, succumbing to malnourishment and looking as though he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Johnny's curly blonde hair was stringing and ripped off in whole chunks, his face covered in scratches as well. It looked like my cousin was wearing a goddamn Halloween mask. It was then I noticed Gator. His full, multicolored coat now thinning, mangy, and red with bite marks. My heart broke seeing both of my companions like this. My eyes glanced to the TV. I needed to see what kind of film justified this. As I said, I have since watched Heathers, and I know that what was on that TV was definitely not a teen angst movie. The screen showed these images I will never forget. It was CCTV footage of a basement. In it, two people were chained up to a wall. A man and a woman. It took me longer than it should have to recognize the pair. Uncle Jamie and Aunt Margaret, Johnny's parents, the ones who disappeared years ago. Was this movie some kinda hoax? Someone sent in a movie, pretending to be a customer to get a laugh out of us. I didn't understand where they could have gotten the footage though. None of it made any kind of sense to me. The TV emitted the screams of the couple, begging for help, crying and wailing. Then the screen went dark, and it appeared as though time had passed as now Jamie had a beard, and the pair both looked gaunt. Something entered the room. It didn't move like a person, and the camera couldn't really capture its movements. The creature went over to Margaret, slinking all around her, and she sobbed as it did so. She whimpered something about how they were hungry, and the creature laughed in a low tone the microphone on the camera could barely register. Jamie protested loudly as the creature dragged a talon-like finger down Margaret's shoulder blade and removed her entire arm from its socket. Blood gushed out of her empty shoulder, and Margaret gurgled on the spit from her own sobs. The creature took the arm and placed it before Jamie, and then unshackled him. Jamie's lithe form launched toward the creature, but before he could spear it, it had dissipated into a gray mist and left the pair. Another dark screen transitioned into what must have been days later because Margaret was gray and dead on the floor of the dingy basement, and Jamie was looking awful. The man aimlessly chewed on the last remaining bits of Margaret's arm, and with a shameful gaze, he looked at the camera and said more. Another transition, more of Margaret was gone, and Jamie was even thinner, and his skin lacked any color. Much like Johnny before me, Jamie's skin was tight, and his hair was clearly ripped out. The final scene was Jamie, at the end of his restraints, screaming at the top of his lungs, looking nothing like the man I remembered from family gatherings. His eyes were massive, body completely naked, every bone showing, and his arms had elongated, now reaching the floor even when he was standing tall, and he used them to navigate the small basement. When he screamed, I noticed that his mouth was a perfectly circular hole, skin tight, revealing needle-like teeth. The film ended with Jamie forming one sentence in a low, raspy voice that sounded more like an animal imitating a man than an actual human being. "Find Johnny." That brought me back to Jamie, growling and moaning as the movie ended, reaching an arm that seemed just a little too long to rewind the movie and start it over. "Hey, come on, let's go," I said as I reached for Johnny, desperate to get him away from the cursed movie. As my hand reached for him, Gator growled and lunged for my wrist, biting it hard. The dog seemed stronger than I remembered and dragged me down to the ground. Before I realized what was happening, Johnny too was on top of me, his flat teeth sinking into the soft flesh of my cheek. I could hear the flesh rip from my face and could taste the blood fill my mouth as I snapped into action. Self-preservation kicked in, and with my free hand I yanked the cord that powered the AC toward myself, knocking it from its perch on the wall and down onto Johnny and I. It fell with a big thud, and I heard a sick crack as it snapped something inside Johnny, some kind of bone. And before you judge me, no, it did not kill my cousin. It sure did stop him though, and it shocked the dog enough to get him off of me. I sprang to my feet. With one hand I grabbed Gator by the collar, and boy did he thrash about. With my other hand, I clutched my bleeding cheek and tried to stop the flow of blood. I ran from that hellish shed and into my truck, slammed Gator into the crate we kept for him in the truck bed and got behind the wheel. The engine came to life, and so did my dear cousin as I heard a screech and saw something with long arms, gray skin, and a taste for my flesh emerge from that shed. I heard Gator howling from the crate, and I heard monster screeching as I tore through the dark deserted roads leading to Gosmer. I could hear Johnny gaining on me, and I checked my rearview mirror to see two of those things chasing me. I swear to God, if you let me live, I swear I will never skip church again. Please God. I rambled off prayers as I saw the outline of Gosmer in the distance. One of them let off a massive roar as it launched itself in the air and landed on the hood of my pickup truck, and it was then that I crossed over into downtown Gosmer. The thing turned around to look at me. It looked just like the thing that used to be Uncle Jamie, but honestly it could have easily been Johnny. It spoke in that animal-like tone. "We'll find you, Bill." And as it finished its sentence, my truck crashed directly into the post office of downtown Gosmer. I woke up to find the creatures gone, sirens wailing in the distance and the sound of a barking, frantic Gator. I prayed he and I would survive this before fading back out of consciousness. I did walk away from this all alive, but not free. You don't get to have your cousin go missing and crash into the post office without some kind of repercussions. I told the cops it was meth. That was a lot better than telling them my cousin tried to eat me and disappeared with his father into the desert, probably to eat some other poor guy. Gator was all right from the accident miraculously, and he ended up shaking that mange and acting like a normal dog again for the most part. I went away for a few years. While I was gone, Sarah Jane kept an eye on him for me. Gator was different though, skittish, anxious, and afraid to leave my side. I did only about 3 years in prison, but a lot had changed while I was gone. My company was long forgotten about, and no one would trust a meth head enough to do business with anyway, so it didn't really matter that much. My truck was gone, my trailer turned into an actual meth den, and even most of the surrounding trailers had moved on. After I was released from prison, the first thing I tried to do was track down Regina Fairway, the woman who had rented Heather's. I went to her address in Las Vegas, only to find a condemned house. After a trip to the local library and a couple hours spent looking for any news on Regina Fairway, I found a newspaper article. Regina had been found in the desert, ripped limb from limb with no explanation for how she got there in the first place. The crazy part was, she was killed one day before everything went down with Johnny. I then returned to Gosmer with a succinct goal in mind. I visited the site with Sarah Jane and Gator. I didn't want to go alone, and she was the only thing close to a friend I had anymore. Also, Sarah Jane had her daddy's gun as I was not taking any chances. We approached the undisturbed shed, and I spoke softly to Sarah Jane. If my trailer is a crack house now, why is my shed the same? I suppose it's kind of disturbing. Really bad vibe coming from it, Sarah Jane said, reaching for my arm, clearly spooked. It looks like the police left it how they found it, I said as I crossed the threshold. Bader whimpered and stayed at the entrance. I think he understood what I was looking for and didn't want any part in it. I approached the VHS player, unplugged it from the wall, and picked it up. This is all I needed. Shocked, no one took it. Ain't nobody wants it. It's probably cursed, Sarah Jane said. I need to know if what I saw was real that night. And with that, we went back to Sarah Jane's house. We settled down, made sure all the lights were on, and Gator was in the other room, and turned it on. The VHS booted up, and the start screen to Heather's appeared. I didn't know what to make of it, and I still don't, but I knew then I needed to move on from Gosmer. I knew I would never understand what happened to Johnny. I said goodbye to my dear friend Sarah Jane a week later, and found myself an old RV to travel in, and took to the road, truly wayward for the first time. Some folks say you see things in the desert. I used to think it was because they couldn't process all of that empty space, so they imagined little green men. As I left the Mojave Desert behind, the wind howled alongside Gator, the cactus thinned out into sprawling empty land, and two creatures ran parallel to me off in the distance, watching me leave Gosmer behind. I haven't seen them since that night I left the desert, and now it's been 30 years. I'm still wayward. Gator is sadly long gone, but he had a long life with me. I never sought companionship beyond him, as I knew I'd have to live my life of the road. You see, every time I settle down somewhere for too long, I see my dear cousin and uncle somewhere off in the distance, and every time, they get a little closer. They howl at night, demanding my attention. My name is Bill Greenfield, I am 54 years old, and I am wayward. I have been chased by something that is now referred to as a rake, and its daddy for 30 some odd years. I am from a time before streaming, the internet and all that. I have lived my life as a loveless vagabond, chased by fear and inevitability. I am posting this here because I am done moving. Tonight, I return to Gosmer, and there I will stay. If Johnny comes for me, so be it. I am done hiding. You hear that sound? Yeah, the sound of the sirens. I have to remind myself every time I hear them that it's just a test of our national emergency warning system, although a part of me will always remain skeptical. Growing up, I had an idealistic childhood. We lived in a small fishing town that had been founded in the late 1600s off the coast of Maine, littered with historic architecture, and the sweet scent of the sea mixed with the scent of the bakery every morning to greet the residents. My family was among the slightly better off in the town, so there wasn't much we didn't have, and my parents showered my little sister and I with love every chance they got. Our father would take us down to the coast to collect seashells for our mother, to then use in little crafting projects of all types with the two of us later. My favorite thing to do was to close my eyes and feel the wind bellowing up off the sea, whipping around me, and listening to the rumbling of the waves crashing ashore. Living right on the coast meant it wasn't uncommon that we would be hit with rainfall coming inland from the sea. On occasion, when the storms were particularly extreme, the sound of the sirens would slowly start to blare buildings into a crescendo, only to climb again and again, ensuring that along with bellowing thunder and crashing rain, our ears were ringing with the severity of the sirens. I never liked when these storms happened. My little sister seemed to be excited by them. She would often ignore our mother's orders to stay inside and run out into the backyard to jump in puddles and spin in the rain. Our father often did nothing to discourage this. On occasion he even cheered her on. I think he enjoyed the storms too and the energy they brought. The day those things came ruined everything though. I remember that our mother and father had been home together on vacation from their jobs, and we were spending the time together. That morning Mom had made a huge breakfast spread, and our father came marching down the stairs, shouting, "Where are my two favorite skippers?" My sister and I ran up to him, hugging him, and then we all sat to enjoy the breakfast laid out in front of us. That's when it first happened. We heard that all too familiar winding up of the siren leading to a bellowing tone, signaling that we should take shelter. Looking bewildered, our mother shuffled quickly to the window, commenting on how it was a beautiful day out. Dad was quick to dismiss the siren as a fluke, and we continued to go about our morning as usual, just with the siren now humming in the background. As the day progressed and no news came about the sudden and out-of-place siren, we were growing antsy. Our father finally decided he had had enough and donned his faded blue baseball cap and bounded down the street into town, determined to get to the bottom of things. Hours had passed and he hadn't returned still, and I could almost swear there were more sirens now, all blasting their song in different directions. As the sun began to set behind the horizon, our mother grew impatient waiting for our father to return, so she told us to stay put and watch some TV until she returned. She set off into the twilight of the evening in the direction of town. About 10 minutes later was when we saw the emergency broadcast come across our TV. The TV stated a simple pre-recorded message to stay indoors and to shelter in place and await further instructions. This caused my stomach to drop and my throat to tighten up. There I was with my younger sister alone in our house, not knowing where our parents were, having every scary thought possible running through our minds. That was when we heard what sounded like screaming coming from down the street towards town. Jumping to attention, my little sister rushed to the front door and bolted out into the porch, with me following close behind to get her to come back in. When I caught up to her, I found her staring out onto the shoreline across the road with a frozen, confused expression on her face. I slowly lifted my gaze from her to where she was staring. That's when I first saw it. A massive creature bounding its way slowly up the shoreline as waves crashed against its thin, jagged legs. This monstrosity was at least 40 feet tall and looked somewhat human in shape, but far too large and jagged. I could barely make out its features in the dwindling sunlight, but I was able to see it was covered in skin that looked the color of rust, and its arms were almost the length of its whole body, almost reaching the ground, where its hands were covered in what looked like wires and jagged metal. The head was what made the least sense to me in that moment. It seemed to be two sirens placed on a slim pole, each just off center of the other. The opening seemed to be filled with sharp teeth covered in some type of rusty liquid, with a long snake-like tongue protruding out of each, as though it was tasting its surroundings. I noticed out of the corner of my eye something moving below the creature, between the fence line separating the beach from the grass field we lived across from. It was a person, I was sure of once I saw them stand up and make a run for it toward a boat shack about 50 feet away from them. It wasn't long before the creature seemed to take notice of the person, and it blasted out what seemed like a battle cry and bound after the person, swooping them up in its sharp claws. The person screamed for dear life as the creature raised it to its heads and began to what looked like shredding them alive, spraying blood and body parts far and wide. I stood watching, frozen in fear, when I heard another siren bellow. Turning quickly, I saw another one of those creatures drifting down the road in our direction. Thinking quickly, I grabbed my little sister by the arm and rushed inside, where I then locked all the doors and turned off all the lights. My sister and I quietly headed into the small fruit cellar we had, with a blanket and an old camping lantern. My sister found a way to fall asleep through the booming sound of the sirens and the screams coming from above us. I sat in that dingy room made of compacted dirt for hours, with my mind transfixed on what could have happened to our parents. As dawn approached, the sounds of the night before seemed to have completely subsided and were replaced by the morning songs of the birds and the calls of the seagulls. We made our way out of the fruit cellar slowly so as to not make any noise. We pushed open the front door slowly, staying low enough to be under the cover of the railing along our front porch. Lifting my head above the railing, standing completely still and maybe only 30 feet away, I saw the creature from the night before, but this time I saw many of them looming still above the canopy of trees and jetting out front the water along the shoreline and standing completely still between homes down our street. I heard a rattling coming from a few houses over and realized it must have been the neighbor's pit bull. There was a loud crack, and the barking grew stronger and closer as the dog came into view. I could see the creature start to stir as the dog got closer. Once the dog was roughly 50 feet from the creature in front of us, it jerked suddenly, crouching low before releasing a booming siren, sending my sister and I shuffling back against the house and the dog bounding the opposite direction. The sound the creature made seemed to have woken the others because one by one, we heard the winding of a new siren, joining the choir of beastly calls. The dog managed to shimmy itself into a storm drain, just as the creature reached its long thin arm to grab it. Quickly, once the animal was out of the creature's sight, it returned to a still position, and the sound of its siren faded out, followed by the others. Silence washed over us again, and I whispered to my little sister to head for the door and go back inside. Every few hours we would hear the sirens bellow out their hunting call again, and each time we did, my sister and I would sink and cower deeper and deeper into the cellar. As time went on, the sirens got fewer and further apart until it had been a whole day since we had heard anything. That's when I felt the rumbling of what seemed like semi-trucks coming down our street, and I heard a car horn along with a message on a loudspeaker. A loud male voice boomed with authority. "This is the United States National Guard." My sister and I looked to each other, perplexed. "This area is clear, and all surviving citizens are required to report to the command post at the center of town." A look of relief washed over my sister as we hugged. We clambered out into the porch to see with our own eyes, and sure enough, there was a procession of tanks and big trucks and soldiers marching down the street with horns repeating the message we heard just moments ago. We made our way into the town center with the procession, as well as a few people who had stumbled out of their hiding places themselves. Once in the town center, we had to tell a guard our names, and, when asked if we knew where our parents were, we answered with a no and told them that they had gone out the first night and never came back. The guard led us to a tent with a few other children we recognized and left us there to wait. Some time later, that same guard came in asking for us both to follow him once more, and he led us to what looked like a medical tent. It was in there, on a cot in the corner, we saw our mother, who was crying tears of joy, wrapping us up in her arms, one of them wrapped up in bandages. Instantly the world stopped, however, as the booming sound of a siren bellowed out through the air. My blood ran cold and my mother grabbed us both, and we ran outside. There, bounding down the street, was another one of those creatures, only moving much faster and seeming even more aggressive than the ones before. Soldiers ran forward, shooting at it seemingly to no avail, only making the beast angrier and more vicious. That's when I noticed, stuck to a jagged piece of flesh on the least, was a faded blue baseball cap splattered in crimson. Before I could articulate what that meant, a blast came from the sky, sending bits of the creature flying in all directions. The remaining inhabitants of the town I had grown up in were forced to relocate, and we all were sworn to secrecy about what happened in exchange for a good deal of money. The official story released by the US military was that a sudden massive storm battered the town and surrounding area, causing catastrophic damage and causing a nearby nuclear reactor to become unstable. This of course rendered the area too dangerous for humans to live there, resulting in the relocation of the remaining population not taken from us by the storm waters. When you hear the sound of sirens, just listen carefully And if you hear more than one, stay hidden.